Chapter 285. No matter how strong a cultivator was, if his heart was pierced, he should be dead, right? Ninkei was still extremely vigilant. This was because the old monk's state and strength had exceeded all his battle experience. He did not know what kind of survival ability the other party, who had already surpassed the 5 states, had. That was why he did not pull out his knife. Instead, he stared at the old monk's eyes that were inches away from him, looking at the life in the deepest part of his old eyes. With a forceful twist of his wrist, the cold blade directly shattered the old monk's heart into pieces. The old monk's body suddenly convulsed. He clutched his chest in pain, but did not die immediately. Ninkei frowned and prepared to pull out his padao to chop off the person's head. The old monk stared at Ninkei's waist and suddenly laughed maniacally. His laughter was maniacal, but his laughter was very weak. In the end, it turned into a sobbing sound. He panted and said, "I see. Is this fate?" This old peerless powerhouse finally understood something from Ninkei at the moment of his death. He murmured, "I was born a devil. I will die a devil. I thought I could jump out of the 3 realms. But I did not expect that when I finally die, I will know that my life will always be in this mountain." Ninkei did not care about what the old monk was saying. He was not an artistic youth and did not have the hobby of listening to the last words of a strong enemy. He only wanted to kill the other party completely and end this nightmarish encounter. However, when he wanted to pull out his padao, he realized that the old monk's body seemed to have turned into a swamp. The sharp and smooth blade was tightly stuck in his chest. Fortunately, there was no powerful force coming from the blade. His sense of perception did not suffer another mental attack. Since he could not pull out his knife, he would go deeper. Ninkei grunted and exerted force again. The padao in his hands directly pierced through the old monk's body. The Howren sword chi in his chest and abdomen flowed along the blade without hesitation. Shaken by the sword style, the old monk spat out a mouthful of blood. After being imprisoned here for decades, he could only drink water from the cracks of the bluestone rocks and eat white skeletal corpses. Although the old monk was a person who was able to abstain from eating, he was still tortured to the point that he did not look human. Perhaps because of the lack of water, the blood he spat out was black and extremely viscous. It was like the oil at the bottom of a stove that was used to seeing smoke and fire. The old monk slowly sat up straight, ignoring the Howren sword style that was destroying all the vitality in his internal organs. He looked at Ninkei's face in front of him and slowly spread his hands on his knees, forming the famous lotus mudra. Previously he was cut by the blade, and now he only had 4 fingers left on both of his hands. The white bones between the broken fingers were oozing with blood, looking extremely terrifying. However, as soon as the incomplete lotus seal appeared, a clear aura immediately enveloped his body. The gentle and compassionate feeling gradually spread out among the broken bones on the ground. In the west, there was a lotus that fell into the world. It had 32 petals and each petal was different. Each petal was a world. Now there were only 4 petals left. They belonged to the same world, yet it was peaceful because of this. Since it could not jump out of the 3 realms, and since it was only in this mountain, then why did it have to create countless illusory worlds? If it wanted to surpass the 3 realms, why did it have to let the petals go with the wind? It would be more beautiful if it bloomed quietly in the mountain. Master Lotus quietly looked at Ninkei's eyes. Then Ninkei heard his voice. He was not controlled by Master Lotus's psyche power, and was not forced to enter the world that was 1 foot in front of him. Instead, it was when 2 people's souls met in the psyche realm and they could feel each other's consciousness, or rather, their thoughts. The moment they met, Ninkei could clearly tell that Master Lotus's heart was very calm. It was not joy, but a kind of enlightenment after a thorough understanding. This feeling even seemed to be a little intimate. Master Lotus's eyes were as warm as a spring lake as he quietly looked at Ning Quebec. What is it that I am pursuing? What is it that people of our generation are pursuing? Under the heavenly way, can there be a new world that is different from the past? I don't know, and I also don't know if Kuhauren knew in the end. He looked at the mottled sword marks on the bluestone wall, and a trace of a smile appeared on his pale old face. In the end you still won. Your successor won. But can he obtain the final victory? The devil's doctrine was destroyed because of you and me. Will it be revived in his hands? My revenge against you will probably start like this, but I don't know how it will end. Or should this be the beginning of my revenge against Haotian? Then Master Lotus retracted his gaze and continued to look at Ninkei's eyes. Ninkei's mind buzzed. He felt that many things were transmitted from the old monk's crystal clear and calm gaze. Those things were not specific cultivation knowledge, nor were they images. They were just some vague feelings. You have already joined the devil. If you want to cultivate the devil's doctrine, you must first cultivate Buddhism. Then please walk bravely into the darkness. Although you do not have much chance of success and might die the moment you start on your journey, I still wish you well and curse you. Master Lotus looked at him quietly as he said his last words in this world. He slowly closed his eyes and spread his hands on his knees, like a white lotus withering. Ninkei held the hilt of his knife tightly and looked in front of him in confusion. There seemed to be a slight sound as the wind blew past. The old monk's body that was hanging on the blade suddenly cracked like a weathered sand sculpture. It fell onto the messy bones on the ground and made a rustling sound. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust, bones to bones. The young master of the Song Kingdom, Lien Sheng, came to this world with water lilies. When he was still an innocent baby, he had already joined the devil's doctrine. This was not something he could choose, because his family had always been a member of the devil's doctrine. After marriage, his beloved wife discovered this secret and was killed by his father. He built a hut beside the grave to guard it. Since they could not live together, he wanted to die together. Hence, he entered the grave late at night and prepared to die together. That night, it was raining and he meditated in front of the grave for half a night. Then, he put on his wet clothes and started to travel the world. He left his family and cultivated all the way. He showed his wonderful state in the Lang Temple and became famous. He wanted to destroy the devil's doctrine. However, when the hierarch of the West Hill Divine Palace invited him to join the devil's doctrine, he found himself close to the front gate of the devil's doctrine deep in the wilderness. It was only then that he realized that he was born to be a person here. Not a temple, not a temple, not a divine hall, not a Wa mountain, but a mountain abandoned by Haotian. He still wanted to destroy the devil's doctrine that was rotten and smelled like the mud at the bottom of the lotus pond. However, he realized that after destruction he should be reborn. Hence, he wanted to create a new devil's doctrine and then create a new world. He had extraordinary talent and cultivated in Taoism, Buddhism and the devil's doctrine. He wanted to use the devil to cover the sky and Taoism to obey the heaven. Finally, he used Buddhism to reach the nirvana realm and jump out of the three realms. Only then could he erase the ruthless heaven's way of the old world and find something that he wanted to find through time. For this, he did not hesitate to do evil. Gradually, he did not know what evil was. He did many earth-shattering things and made a name for himself. He killed thousands of people. Then he met a man named Kaharan. At that time he had already arranged everything. He only needed to hide on the black jade throne in the Peach Mountain Divine Hall and wait patiently. He waited for Kuharan and the headmaster of the academy to die. Then, he would start to change the world. However, one day, he saw a woman beside Kuharan. The woman had a pure and charming smile on her face. She looked very much like his former wife. He smiled warmly like a friend and started ahead of time. He did not succeed. He was imprisoned in the netherworld for decades. He waited for hope in desperation. Then the moment he saw hope, he died. Only when he saw death did he realize that he did not care about anything. Only then did he realize that he had been waiting for death. That rainy night, he did not have the courage to dig up the tomb. From then on, the world was a lonely tomb to him. He was a gravedigger who had gone mad. He was a person who had died long ago in the tomb. Ninkei stood on the spot with a dazed expression. The padao in his hand slowly fell. Master Lotus died just like that. However, the fragments of consciousness that had been transmitted to his mind previously still existed. Those feelings were complicated and even chaotic, just like Master Lotus. The last sword style in the mottled sword marks on the blue stone wall was still flowing into his body. Together with the aura of heaven and earth, it slowly changed his body. His tattered cotton-padded jacket revealed the gray-white cotton and trembled slightly. Ninkei wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. He supported himself with his padao and walked to the corner of the wall with difficulty. After confirming that Mo Shanshan and Yi Hongyu were only unconscious and not dead, he finally felt relieved. According to his original way of doing things, he would definitely take the opportunity when the Tao addict was unconscious to kill her directly. However, looking at the horrible bite marks on her body, he did not know why he did not do it. Ning Ke sat against the wall and looked down at his chest. He began to cough violently. He felt the changes in his body and the consciousness that the old monk had passed to him. Fear and uneasiness gradually occupied his heart. If these things were known by others, what would the headmaster of academy and the academy do? Once he lost his biggest support, how could he survive in the world that was filled with Haotian's divine light? His body was on the verge of collapse due to the continuous heavy injuries. At this moment he finally relaxed. The fear brought by his rationality and the intense pain from his injuries struck him, making him anxious and unable to calm down. He did not even have time to think about how to leave the front gate of the devil's doctrine. He frowned in pain and did not know how to face the future of his life. With a stomach full of doubts and fear, Ning Ke leaned against the wall and fainted. The Howran sword style on the mottled stone wall floated down and indifferently surrounded his unconscious body. The speed at which the aura of heaven and earth poured into him became extremely slow, but it continued. It seemed that as long as he was alive, it would continue like this forever. He joined the devil in the depths of the mountain that was abandoned by Haotian. At this moment, in the far north of the wilderness, the hot sea gradually froze and entered a long night. This time when the night came, it seemed that it would never leave. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 286. While he was crossing the mountains, she was waiting quietly in Chang'an. It was the same winter, but the coldness was different. Fortunately, the night was still fair. It covered the Tianqi Mountains in Chang'an. In the Lin 47th Street in the middle of winter, the old brush pen shop welcomed another ordinary night. In the small courtyard, Sang Sang sat on a small bench and looked at the white light on her fingertips. Her dark face was illuminated by the light and her willow eyes became brighter, as if she was missing something. The old man smiled at her with his hands in his sleeves. His cotton-padded jacket was much cleaner than before, and his gray hair was combed smoothly. He still looked ordinary, which made it hard to believe that he was the great divine priest of light from the West Hill Divine Palace. A few days ago, there had been a few snowfalls in Chang'an. Tonight, the snow had stopped and the clouds had dispersed. The sky was clear and the dark night sky was dotted with thousands of stars, calmly watching the buildings on the ground and the people inside. The divine light gradually extinguished at her fingertips. Sang Sang looked up at the stars in the sky and asked seriously, "Teacher, the divine skill can sense and control Haotian divine light. Haotian divine light is the sunlight, so why can starlight also work?" The old man took out his hands from the sleeves of his cotton-padded jacket and was ready to explain the true meaning of Haotian. Sang Sang did not notice his action. She squinted at the night stars and frowned. She continued, "Are these stars in the sky countless suns? But they are too far away from us, so they look smaller and darker. That's why the aura we feel when we practice the divine skill is much lighter than during the day." The old man sighed with emotion. He thought that he had realized this after practicing the divine skill for 3 years, but his new disciple found it so early. He could not help but feel happy, proud, disappointed, and slightly sour. He said, "Logically speaking, it should be so. But I once saw the stars more than 10 years ago, and felt that they were different from what I imagined." Sang Sang stopped looking at the starry sky and looked at the old man's kind face. She asked seriously, "Teacher, cultivation is to control weapons to hit people by controlling the chi of heaven and earth. How should we practice the divine skill?" The old man shook his head with a smile. He wondered why his disciple was so obsessed with using divine skill to beat people. He said softly, "The Haotian divine light is the most tranquil and the origin of all the primordial chi in the world. But it is also the most violent because it can purify everything in the world into nothingness." A withered leaf floated to Song Song's knee. She glanced at the snow marks left on the leaf and gently brushed it away. She looked at the old man and continued to ask seriously, What does Haotian divine light rely on to purify everything in the world? Like burning firewood? He didn't expect the little girl to use firewood, cooking as a metaphor for the purification of the divine light. The old man couldn't help but laugh. Then he explained seriously, you can imagine the divine splendor as countless tiny particles. It is impossible to see the specific appearance of these tiny particles with the naked eye. These particles can emit light and possess almost infinite speed. However, once they travel at almost infinite speed, they will lose all their power. The spread of the power of the divine light is more like the ripples of a lake. The power contained in the waves is where its power lies. But your metaphor is right. Only when the particles in the divine light begin to vibrate violently and produce a high temperature that cannot be seen in the world will it show its unique power of purifying everything in the world. The old man looked at Song Song's little face, paused for a moment and said seriously, the divine skill is a very powerful ability. However, the greater the ability, the greater the responsibility. Anyone who wants to have this ability must have the corresponding moral character. He must have a pure and transparent heart without a trace of darkness. Only in this way will he not be devoured by the divine skill. In his eyes, Sang Sang was clean and transparent from her hair to her toes. It was because of this that he had been wandering around the 47th Street for so many days as if he had found a treasure. He thought that she was the lucky chance that Haotian had given him. At this time, the old man talked about the divine skill in such a serious manner because he was worried that if he left this world in the future, this female disciple would be blinded by the darkness of the world and her heart would be clouded by dust. She would no longer be transparent. There was a well in the courtyard, and the bucket beside the well was filled with freshly picked up water. The starlight seeped in but could not stay. Sang Sang shook her head and said, transparency has no color. But whether it is darkness or light, they are all colors. The old man was silent. He slowly thought about the female disciple's words and felt that they were very reasonable. Vaguely, he found that this statement was correct. He sighed with emotion and thought that perhaps only a truly transparent person could understand this point. Sang Sang continued seriously, young master used to teach me that power is power. It has no attribute like good or evil. Don't believe in any words about innate good or evil. The old man looked into her eyes and found that there was no doubt in her eyes, only certainty and natural belief. His expression changed slightly, and he thought that the young master seemed to be an interesting person. These days in the old brush pen shop, he heard countless nonsense or epigrams left by the young master through Sang Sang. He was a little curious about how the young master could develop such a realistic and certain idea, and he was also a little emotional about the young master's luck that Sang Sang could trust and rely on him so unreasonably. Since you are more interested in the power of the divine skill, let's have a try. The old man smiled and stretched out his index finger. A ball of sacred white flame appeared on his fingertip. There was no temperature in the holy white flame. But the next moment the courtyard was shrouded in a dry and burning atmosphere, and the temperature in the flame began to spread. The first thing we need to do is to perceive and condense the Haotian divine light between heaven and earth, and then with reverence ask the divine light to spread its heat and power outside the light. The ball of white flame floated down from the old man's fingertip and fell on the winter leaf that Sang Sang had brushed off her knee. With a soft sound, the residual snow on the winter leaf and the leaf itself disappeared instantly. Not even a trace of smoke was left. Looking at this scene, Sang Sang lowered her head and thought quietly for a moment. Then she raised her head and imitated the old man. She stretched out her index finger, and a round and lovely flame appeared on her fingertip. The flame contained a terrifying heat. The old man looked at the flame on her fingertip. Although he had felt too much shock from this little female disciple these days, his old eyes still couldn't suppress the expression of amazement and joy. She could condense Haotian divine light with one look, and use Haotian divine light with another look? The old man was praised as the most outstanding great divine priest of light after the legendary figure 1,000 years ago. He was the person closest to Haotian in the world. However, he was very clear that he could not do this, and neither could the person 1,000 years ago. Sang Sang looked at the flame on her fingertip and hesitated. It seemed that she did not know how to deal with it. She looked at the kitchen, at the firewood under the stove and the pot of water on the stove. She thought that she had prepared to boil water. Suddenly, her willowy eyes brightened. She gently flicked the flame on her fingertip into the eye of the stove. The round flame floated into the stove and gently landed on the dry wood. With a light sizzling sound, the dry wood was instantly ignited and began to burn fiercely. In just a moment, the water in the pot began to emit wisps of steam. The flame that floated into the eye of the stove did not burn the firewood into smoke, which showed that the divine light condensed by Sang Sang was far from that of a real powerhouse of divine path in terms of purity and power. However, there was no frustration on her face. Instead, she showed a happy smile, thinking that she did not waste the firewood or the flame on her fingertip. It was really good. Then she said, "Teacher, the water is hot. You can wash the dishes." The old man stood up and clumsily rolled up his thick cotton sleeves. He walked towards the direction of the kitchen, thinking that it was fortunate that they had fishball noodle soup instead of chicken noodle soup. The bowl should not be stained with too much oil and should be easier to wash. My name is Bao, but my surname is Weak, so I am weak. That's all for this chapter. But why am I so happy when I write about Sang Sang? Really? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 287. The old brush pen shop did not keep idlers. Except for Ning Quebec, Sang Sang took in the old man and even persuaded him to start cultivating the divine skill. She sincerely called him her teacher. But thinking of the old man's cowardly appearance before they met, she arranged a lot of housework for him, so that he would not become the kind of old man who carried a teapot and walked around in the street, basking in the sun and picking his teeth, pretending to be pitiful and scolding his daughter-in-law. The old man was not used to it at first. Since he left the small Taoist temple in the kingdom of Song decades ago, he had never done such chores as washing dishes and wiping tables. Whether he was sitting on the throne or being imprisoned in the secluded prison behind the Peach Mountain, there were countless people serving him. As the great god above the clouds, when had his hands ever been stained with water? But now he had to learn these things because it was Song Song's request. He was Song Song's teacher, and he also thought that a successor should learn to respect his teacher. But he was very clear that if he did not listen to this little girl, he might no longer be her teacher at any time, which was absolutely unacceptable to him. Therefore, the most outstanding great divine priest of light in hundreds of years, who proudly betrayed the divine hall and single-handedly broke the confinement array set by the great divine priest of judgment, fell into the cage of life in front of Sang Sang. If the world's devout followers of Haotian Taoism knew what happened to the old man now, that he was doing chores in a shabby alley in Chang'an City, they would probably faint with grief and indignation. No matter how incredible it was, once it was done many times, people would get used to it and even start to enjoy it. It seemed that the great divine priest of light could not escape this natural cycle. The old man rolled up his cotton sleeves and stood by the stove, holding a loofah pulp in his hand and carefully washing the dishes. Because his movements were getting more and more skilled, and it seemed that he would not break the dishes today, he subconsciously became happy, and a childlike expression appeared on his face. After finishing the housework arranged by Sang Sang, the old man walked back to the front berth and put two square tables together to make a temporary bed. He took out a quilt from the corner behind the display shelf and laid it on the bed. He blew out the oil lamp and lay down to sleep. The starlight of the winter night shone on Lin 47th Street through the lattice on the shop door. The old man looked at the frost-like starlight on the ground, pressed the corner of the quilt tightly, and let out a comfortable sigh. He was very satisfied with his decision to leave Peach Mountain, very satisfied with his decision to come to Chang, and very satisfied with his current life. Therefore, he forgot why he left Peach Mountain, why he came to Chang, and even rarely thought of the Black Shadow. Perhaps he subconsciously wanted to extend his life a little longer. To be able to find a successor was a happy thing, and to be able to find a successor like Sang Sang was an indescribable happiness. The old man believed that there had never been such a person in Haotian Taoism in the past 1,000 years, and there probably wouldn't be another one in the next 1,000 years. Sang Sang would definitely inherit his mantle and go further than him. She would eventually see the magical world that he had once glanced at with infatuation. The old man felt that he was not far from death. However, before he died, He could already see the future after death, and it was a bright and beautiful future that made him exclaim in admiration. How could he not be happy? Sang Sang, who was in the house behind the shop, was also ready to sleep. She filled a bucket of remaining hot water and began to warm her feet. She kicked the water gently with her smooth and delicate feet, like a duckling playing in the pond. A 14-year-old girl living alone took in an old man of unknown origin, and the old man had been peeping outside the old brush pen shop for many days. Didn't seem right, but Sang Sang did it. This didn't mean that Sang Sang was a kind and gullible person. She might be kind, but she had been following Ning Ke around in this world for so many years, so she knew how sinister people could be. The reason why she took in the old man was that she saw the holy light exuding from the old man's fingertips, and then she confirmed that she could help Ning Ke fight after learning the divine skill. This reason was very important. In the past 10 years it was Ning Ke who fought and killed for her, and she could only hide under the big black umbrella, occasionally shouting. Now that she had become a big girl, she should be able to do more things such as helping Ning Ke fight and kill when necessary. After getting along with the old man for a long time, Sang Sang even developed a sense of closeness like family, because she could feel who was really good to her. She found that the old man treated her just a little less well than Ning Quebec. I don't know what young master is doing now. It's cold in the wilderness, isn't it? Sang Sang opened her eyes and looked at the roof, her little hand on the slightly cold brick bed. Imagining Ning Ke's life in the wilderness. This was the longest time she had been separated from Ning Ke, and she couldn't get used to it. Because Ning Ke was not at home, she felt that there was no need to warm the newly built brick bed in the north of the house, so she habitually began to be thrifty. These days, the amount of silver charcoal under the brick bed was pitifully small, and the surface of the brick bed was somewhat refreshing. She took out the talismans left by Ning Ke from the cabinet and carefully stuck them on the outside of her underwear. Logically speaking, except for Ning Ke, no one else could stimulate the heat in these failed fire talismans, and he obviously forgot about it. But for some reason, perhaps because she began to cultivate the divine skill, her little body gradually warmed up. The winter of the 14th year of the Tianqi era came earlier and colder than usual. Sang Sang raised her little hand to her mouth and gently breathed out 2 hot breaths. Looking at the mist in her eyelashes, she thought of something. After a moment of hesitation, she took out Ning Ke's bedding from the big cabinet, opened the door and walked into the front bed, and gently covered the old man with it. A warm bed was the most insidious enemy of getting up. So the old man woke up late the next day. Looking at the bright sky outside the shop, he was shocked to think that he had forgotten to line up to buy the hot and sour noodle slice soup. When he hurriedly got up to wash up, he saw a piece of paper pressed down by a stone on the small stool by the well. On the paper was Song Song's young but beautiful handwriting. I just remembered that a sister asked me to go to her house for dinner at night. She will probably be there all day. Teacher, you don't have to wait for me to eat. If you get up late and can't buy the noodle slice soup, you can go to the shop next door to eat. I told Aunt Wu. The snow on the black tiles of the South School Abbey of Haotian Taoism was quietly looking at the red palace wall not far away in the morning light. Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, coughed slightly and looked at the files on the table. He frowned slightly. The official of the Imperial Center Administration who came to report bowed and said seriously, Mr. 13 has left the palace and must have entered Tianqi Mountain. I don't know if he can find the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. As for the tomes of arcane, Nation Master, if the Imperial Court does not send masters there, I'm afraid it will be difficult to get it in front of the Divine Hall. Li Qingshan shook his head and said after a moment of silence, when His Majesty sent Ning Ke to the wilderness, the Imperial Court did not know about the tomes of arcane. Later they decided to let him have a try. It has nothing to do with the Imperial Court or the South School or the Imperial Center Administration. This is the idea of Mr. Second of the Academy, so it is the Academy's business. You don't have to think too much. There was no need to think too much because it was meaningless to think too much. The tomes of arcane in the wilderness was enough to attract the attention of too many forces, especially the West Hill Divine Palace. It was obvious that they had made sufficient preparations for this. Although the intelligence said that the Hierarch Lord and 3 great divine priests were still in Peach Mountain, who knew whether people from the abbey would go there or not? Facing such a situation, The Tang Empire could only defeat the Divine Hall and get the Tomes of Arcane if they launched an all-out attack. However, it was obvious that the Imperial Court would not do this. The Academy was the right way to go. However, Li Qingshan also did not understand why the Academy would put all their hopes on Ning Quebec. After all, that guy's state was really terrible. Li Qingshan did not spend too much time and energy on this matter. He began to read other files sent by the Imperial Center Administration. Now he was completely focused on searching for the traces of the great divine priest of light. The headmaster of Academy was traveling far away, but there was such a powerful and terrible great divine priest lurking in Chang'an City. Both His Majesty and himself would feel very uneasy. The ambush in the late general's mansion ended in failure. Although the empire did not suffer any loss, the South School of Haotian Taoism and the military had been conspiring for a long time, but they got nothing. Could be called a fiasco. In that battle, Li Qingshan did not fight with the great divine priest of light face to face. But he knew that he lost, and the way he lost made him feel very humiliated. If he knew that the great divine priest was washing dishes at this time, would he feel better? Where on earth are you hiding? Stepping on the ebony floor, the nation master slowly walked out of the hall. He stood by the railing and watched the withered flowers in snow for a long time. Then he flicked his sleeves and left the Southern Gate Temple. His eldest disciple He Mingqi hurried to follow him. He glanced at the clear sky and thought that it probably would not snow today, but he still clamped the yellow paper umbrella under his armpit. On the top floor of Wanyan Tower Temple, monk Huangyang was transcribing Buddhist scriptures when he heard the sound behind him. He looked back and saw Li Qingshan's slightly haggard face. He sighed in his heart and stood up to greet him. He looked at his tired face and said, "According to the great divine priest of revelation, the Ming Handscroll should be resurrected in the wilderness and can't get away from the location of the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine. But a few days ago you calculated it, and the location indicated on the map by the cinnabar pen was the Hulun Sea. There is still some distance between the two places." It was quiet at the top of the pagoda. Huangyang did not have the habit of ordering the little monk around, so the conversation between the two could not be heard by others. Li Qingshan shook his head and said, "After all, the Tomes of Arcane is a sacred relic of Haotian Taoism. The Imperial Court really has no reason to take action. Our South School is in an even more awkward position. Now that the Academy has taken it over, I will no longer care about this matter." Huangyang looked at him quietly and suddenly said, "Are you going to care about that matter all the time?" Li Qingshan said calmly, "The divine priest of light is in Chang'an. His Majesty will not allow the divine hall to send people here. That is my responsibility. As the nation master of Tang, I have the responsibility to protect the empire and this capital." Then he looked at Huangyang and said seriously, "You have to be careful these days." Monk Huangyang put his palms together and said slowly, "What kind of person is the divine priest of light? I am just a nobody who has nothing to do with the world and hides in a shabby pagoda copying scriptures. Why would he want to come and verify his cultivation with me?" After saying this, he walked to the edge of the pagoda and looked at the magnificent Chang, and under the clear winter sky. He said calmly with a smile, "If he really dares to come, although I am incompetent, if he does not show his real power, there is no reason to erase me from this world quietly. At that time, the big tactical array of Chang'an City can suppress him in an instant." Now, neither the West Hill Divine Palace nor the Tang Empire knew why the Divine Priest of Light came to Chang'an City after escaping from the Peach Mountain. If it was because of the prophecy and the old matter more than a decade ago, it did not make sense. If he wanted to harm the Tang Empire, then Li Qingshan and Huangyang Monk were undoubtedly the most likely targets. In this case, Huangyang Monk's previous words had the compassion and fearlessness of feeding a tiger with his own body. Li Qingshan looked at the old monk's robe and shook his head after a moment of silence. He said, "We are too passive. We must find him first." Monk Huangyang turned around and found that there was a chessboard in front of Li Qingshan. Li Qingshan was reaching for the chess box. He was slightly surprised and said, "Are you going to make a divination again?" Li Qingshan put his right hand into the chess box and touched the slightly cold chess pieces. He nodded. Monk Huangyang frowned and said, "Your divination ability is at the cost of your lifespan. Why do you do this? Li Qingshan said calmly, these days, senior brother has been looking for the divine priest of light in Chang and city. Until today he has still found nothing. He has taken such a big risk, so I have to do something. Master Yensei was the most powerful divine talisman master in the world. Even in the West Hill Divine Palace, he could be on an equal footing with the Hierarch Lord and the Great Divine Priest. Wei Guangming was the most powerful divine priest of light in hundreds of years. No one in the world knew who was more powerful. However, this kind of search and encounter was extremely disadvantageous to divine talisman masters. The crisp sound was like the spring rain coming to the world ahead of time. Dozens of chess pieces jumped and spun on the chessboard. Then they calmed down and stopped moving. Li Qingshan had casually pulled out these chess pieces from the box, but it was very strange. There was only a single white piece while the rest were all black. The black matte stone chess pieces piled up silently on the left side of the chessboard, surrounding the white piece in the center. Li Qingshan looked at the chessboard in silence for a long time. Then he said, he is still in Chang and not far from us. Chang and city seemed to have been stimulated by something this winter, and became as moody as summer. It had been sunny last night and this morning, but after a while, the sky was covered by gray clouds and snowflakes were falling. He Mingqi looked up at the sky and heard the footsteps in the tower behind him. He quickly took out the yellow paper umbrella from under his armpit and opened it. Looking at the nation master's cheeks, which were even more haggard than before, he could not help but feel nervous. Returning from Wanyan Tower to Nanmengui, He Mingqi went straight to the kitchen and personally watched the handyman brew the medicine. As the eldest disciple of the Tang Nation master, he did not have a very good aptitude for cultivation. He knew that he could not persuade his teacher not to waste his mind and even his lifespan to perform divination, so he could only do what he could. He held the boiling medicine bowl and slowly walked into the quiet Taoist temple. Li Qingshan sat by the window and looked at the flying snow outside. He did not look back when he heard the footsteps. He waved his hand to let him put down the medicine bowl. He Mingqi did not put down the medicine bowl. Instead, he knelt beside him and raised the medicine bowl with both hands, silently and stubbornly asking his teacher to take the medicine first. Li Qingshan sighed helplessly. He took the medicine bowl and drank it slowly. Then he sighed and said, "You are so silent and stubborn. Even if you are in charge of the Imperial Center administration, you are not suitable. If I die in the future, what will you do?" Beautiful Monday morning. Please vote for Jiang Ye's youngest and freshest recommendation, Dear Big Guy. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 288. Your aptitude in cultivation is limited. You have made little progress in Taoism over the past 10 years. Your temperament is not suitable to deal with the civil and military officials in the court. Naturally, you can't be the master of the nation. But you are my disciple. Without the dazzling Taoist robe of the master of the nation, I'm afraid that the people you offended will harm you. Li Qingshan looked at his eldest disciple, his eyes full of worry and helplessness. He Mingqi lowered his head and answered, I really don't have much ability. I've been used to serving master and uncle these years, doing some general affairs such as files. If you die in the future, I'll go to your grave to practice Taoism after I finish the rest of the things I should do. I don't need to seek knowing destiny state, I just want to live a few more years. Guarding a lonely grave in the bitter wind and rain? That sounds a bit too bleak. Li Qingshan laughed out loud and then stopped smiling. He looked at He Mingqi and said, His Majesty ordered you to supervise the first prince's study. I know you have a good relationship with him, but this matter will bring you great trouble in the future. In order to deal with those possible troubles, I think you should make some preparations in advance. At this point, his voice suddenly deepened. He Mingqi was slightly stunned. He moved his knees 2 steps forward and listened to the words that floated into his ears. His expression became more and more nervous. There was a look of disbelief in his eyes. He raised his head and was shocked speechless. Li Qingshan looked at his disciple and seriously exhorted, When I met His Majesty in the past, we met at the fortune-telling stall outside the fragrance workshop. As long as I don't act recklessly, His Majesty will always allow me to fool around. I hope you can also become the first prince's partner or even friend. In this way we can be master and disciple." He Mingqi was so touched that he knelt on the ground completely speechless. Li Qingshan looked at him tenderly and said, "Go." He Mingqi left. Li Qingshan turned back and looked out of the window. Watching the slowly falling snowflakes, he was lost in thought. Everyone knew that although he was in a high position, he was born in the streets and was an interesting person who liked to laugh and scold. However, after sitting in the position of the master of the nation for such a long time, he had to think about the important matters in the court. He knew very well who would inherit the throne. As long as the academy kept its vow to stay out of politics, no one in the empire, be it the military or the prime minister, had the right to speak. It was all up to His Majesty. If His Majesty decided to let the second prince inherit the throne, then everything would be fine. If the emperor decided to let the eldest prince inherit the throne, would the empress really be willing? So many years had already passed, but Li Qingshan was still unable to understand why the emperor and empress would have such deep feelings for each other. However, he believed in his own eyes. He believed that the feelings between the emperor and empress were sincere. When His Majesty was present, the empress would willingly wash her hands in the depths of the palace, but what about after His Majesty left? He looked at the slowly falling snow outside the window and sighed softly. As the master of the Southern Gate Temple of Haotian, did he really dare to hope that the Saintess of Diabolism would let go of the supreme power of the Tang Empire? Last month, my uncle held a banquet in his mansion and wanted to introduce me to some officials in the court. However, 3 or 4 officials heard that I would also attend the banquet, so they turned back halfway and did not come to see me. And the day before yesterday, that woman held a banquet in the palace. All the officials with some status in the court sent their wives to the palace to flatter her. I think they even wanted to send their own mothers there. What on earth are they thinking? Don't they know that I am the eldest son? In a quiet courtyard, a young man dressed in bright yellow clothes sat on a chair and cursed at the falling snowflakes in front of the courtyard. There was no longer any morbid nobility on his pale and tender face, only endless hatred and resentment. Liu sat on a chair next to him and was watching the falling snow. Hearing this, she could not help but frown. The things that happened in the court recently made her a little uneasy, and now she was even more displeased. She scolded in a low voice, "That's our mother. What do you mean by that, woman? It's even worse to criticize the officials so rudely." The young man in bright yellow clothes was the first prince, Li Huiyuan. Hearing his sister's scolding, he was a little shocked, but he still held his head high and said stubbornly, "Sister, we only have one mother. I don't think she is qualified to be our mother. Those officials are very unbearable in themselves. What's wrong with me saying a few words?" Liu looked into his eyes and said solemnly, "As the successor of the Tang Empire, there are countless eyes watching you in the dark, so you have to pay more attention to your words and actions at all times." Li Huiyuan sneered and said, "The problem is that father didn't make me the crown prince. That's enough." Liu slightly frowned and asked, "How are your studies in the Imperial College?" Li Huiyuan shrugged and showed an indifferent expression on his pale face. "Father asked He Mingqi to watch me every day. It's impossible for me to play truant even if I want to. Don't worry, the grand secretaries all say that I'm diligent." Liu saw that he did not seem to be pretending and felt a little better. She reminded him, "He Mingqi is also in charge of the affairs of the Imperial Center Administration. He also has to watch you study. It's very hard. Don't be angry at him." Li Huiyuan did not understand why she suddenly mentioned this. He said confusedly, "I have a close relationship with Mingqi. Of course I won't be angry at him. But why are you so cautious about this?" Liu looked at the falling snow in front of the courtyard and said slowly, "A few days ago, the Academy, the Imperial Court and the Southern Gate Temple finally reached a consensus that Ningke would not be a visiting professor of the Southern Gate Temple, but would directly take over the position of the Nation Master. But He Mingqi is after all the Nation Master's disciple, and is deeply loved by the Nation Master. It's crucial for us to get the support of the South School of Haotian Taoism. Although I haven't asked him, I believe he will support us because of my relationship with Mingqi. Li Huiyuan thought that even if he Mingqi could inherit the influence of the nation master Li Qingshan in the South School of Haotian Taoism in the future, he would not be able to sit on the position of the nation master. He could not help but feel a little regretful. He touched his head and sighed. I'm afraid that Ningke will be a key in the future. I don't know how to make him surrender. Hearing this, Li Yu raised her thin eyebrows and scolded. I told you to be careful. But you dare to say anything. As a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, who in the world is qualified to say that he will surrender? Li Huiyuan could not hide his arrogance and said contemptuously, even if I can't do it now, when I sit on the throne in the future, there will be countless masters in the imperial center administration and thousands of soldiers in the military. Do you think I will be afraid of him? Hearing this, Li Yu was angry and disappointed. She stared at him and said in a low voice, the academy does not interfere in the court affairs and obeys the law of the Tang Empire. That is the rule set by the headmaster of the academy. But the court is not able to make them follow this rule. If you want to sit on the throne safely, you must remember that you must maintain respect for the academy in front of others and behind the scenes. Do you hear me? Li Huiyuan was shocked by the anger in her eyes. He felt a chill in his heart and nodded subconsciously. Then, to make her happy, he held her hand and shook it gently. He said with a smile, I know, sister. No one in the world is qualified to say that he will surrender to the academy. But I believe you can make Ningke surrender. Hearing this, Li Yu thought of the bonfire on the journey, the story beside the bonfire, and the lad carrying 3 knives on his back. She could not help laughing at herself and said lightly, I don't have that ability. At this time, a nanny came up and said softly, the young prince is awake. Miss Sang told him a couple of stories and brought him here. Li Yu glanced at her brother and said, you go back to the palace first. Father will test you again tonight. Li Huiyuan was puzzled and said, what's there to be afraid of? Father has never opposed me and my brother being close. Li Yu frowned and said helplessly, you have a bad temper. It's better to stay away from you. Sang seems to be indifferent, but her heart is as clear as a mirror. You can't hide your boring thoughts from her. Li Huiyuan was so angry that he laughed and said, she is just a little handmaiden. Why should I stay away from her? Li Yu did not bother to explain anything to him. She directly picked him up from the chair and summoned the eunuchs in the palace. She told them to escort him back to the palace quickly. Looking at the yellow figure disappearing at the stone gate of the garden, she could not help but shake her head. Although her brother had made a lot of progress in the past year, he was still young after all. There were still many things he did not understand. Sang was indeed a very ordinary and even lowly handmaiden. Her status was certainly far from that of a prince of the Tang Empire. However, Li Yu was very clear that this little handmaiden was the key to making Ningke surrender and getting close to the academy. Putting the brush on the inkstone, Li Yu looked at the small regular script she had written and turned to ask, what do you think of my calligraphy? Do you still like them? Sang shook her head and said, I don't know how to judge the quality of calligraphy. As long as it is neat, I think it looks good. Li Yu did not believe her and said with a smile, your young master is one of the famous calligraphers in the world. You have followed him for so many years. How can you not know the quality of calligraphy? How can you praise him when he is grinding ink and adding incense in the middle of the night? Sang opened her bright willowy eyes and said seriously, young master's calligraphy is naturally good. He doesn't need to think of words. Li Yu thought about the meaning of her words and found the pair of master and handmaiden more and more interesting. She joked and said, in your eyes, Ningke is the best in everything he does. I really don't know how the two of you got along with each other like this. Now that he has been away from Chang and for some time, are you used to it? Do you miss him at night? Since returning to Chang and from the city of Wei, Sang often met with Li Yu. The Tang princess and the little handmaiden really had some affection for each other, and did not care about their status when they talked. However, when she heard this, Sang was probably a little embarrassed and actually threw a little tantrum. She turned around with a cold face and ignored her. Li Yu smiled. She was very clear that this kind of teasing could only be used occasionally in the conversation to shorten the psychological distance between the two. The little handmaiden seemed to be embarrassed and annoyed, But in fact, she should be happy with the hidden meaning in this kind of teasing. However, Sang Sang was still young and probably did not know what this kind of emotion was. She did not even know why she was embarrassed and annoyed. Ning Ke, who was not in Chang'an, was obviously in a state of confusion. Sang Sang stood by the courtyard and looked at the falling snow outside. Her slender figure in the background of the messy snow formed a somewhat lonely and touching picture with some kind of hope. Liu quietly looked at this picture, and put the figure of Ning Ke's back beside the little handmaiden in her mind. She found that the picture instantly became rich and harmonious, without the slightest incongruity. She silently sighed and dispelled the trace of envy and regret in her heart. Thinking of a certain news, she softly asked, "I heard that you recently took in a lonely old man in the old brush pen shop?" Sang Sang was slightly startled, turned around and nodded. Liu looked at her slightly dark and thin little face and felt a surge of love in her heart. She seriously reminded her, "Although Chang'an is peaceful and there are people watching over the shop, you should still be careful about this kind of thing." Sang Sang felt the concern and affection in Her Highness's words and seriously comforted her. "It's okay. He is very honest." The great divine priest of light, who had led 2 bloody cases in the world more than 10 years ago and whose hands were stained with the blood of hundreds and thousands of innocent people, could be described as honest? This was a question worth thinking about. But the old brush pen shop was indeed fine. Thanks to Ning Ke's numerous solemn requests before he left Chang'an, the Lin 47th Street now looked as lively and noisy as usual. In fact, the Imperial Palace's bodyguards often secretly came over to inspect. The Chang'an local government's runners patrolled more than 5 times a day, and the Fish Dragon Gang never left to protect the shop from dawn to dusk. Today, apart from the Imperial Palace, this inconspicuous alley was probably the safest in Chang'an. What was strange was that whether it was the Imperial Palace bodyguards, the Chang'an local government or the Fish Dragon Gang that ruled the underground world of Chang'an, they were all carrying out another order recently. They were looking for an old man. However, no one would have thought that the old man they were looking for was in the bookshop that they were guarding. In the evening, Sang Sang was worried about the old man's food and came back from the princess mansion early. She took out the key to open the shop door and walked to the patio to have a look. As expected, the old man was squatting by the stove, preparing to heat the leftovers. She could not help but frown and open the food box that she brought back from the princess mansion. She said, "Eat this." A few days ago, she had tried to let the old man cook. But that night, she saw the blackened rice and the half-empty woodpile beside the stove. She decided not to try this again in order to save rice and dry wood. Just when the old and the young were about to eat dinner, there was a knock on the door. Sang Sang got up and was about to open the door when she suddenly thought of something. She lowered her head and continued eating. The old man understood. He brushed a grain of rice off the front of his cotton-padded jacket and got up to open the door. The door of the old brush pen shop was opened. A monk was standing at the bottom of the stairs. The monk was very young and wore a tattered frock. He had a handsome face and seemed to be above the mortal world. The monk was surprised to find that it was the old man who opened the door. He said, "I'm not looking for you." The old man was stunned. He turned around and said, "I'm looking for you." Sang Sang walked over with a bowl of rice. She looked at the young monk and frowned for a while. She remembered that she had seen this person by the meadow outside the academy when Ning Ke climbed the mountain to the 2nd floor. The monk's eyes suddenly brightened when he saw Song Song's little black face. He recited excitedly in a trembling voice, "Beautiful girl. The love monk Wu Dao has finally found you. These days I have made a few new poems for you. You're the flower on the cliff, waiting for me to pluck it. You're the fish in the lake, entangled in a net made of aquatic plants. You're the biggest obstacle on the way to the other side. I'm willing to stay with you and never leave." Sang Sang listened to the words like flower and fish and glanced at the yellow croaker in the bowl. Please vote enthusiastically to encourage me, who is a little depressed and restless. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 289. Sang Sang didn't think this poem was good. She thought it was worse than the one she wrote for Ning Ke to kill people. She also remembered that this monk had threatened her and Ning Ke outside the academy, So she turned around and closed the door. The door was blocked by Wu Dao's hand. He didn't hide the obsession and crazy possessiveness on his face. He looked at Sang Sang and said excitedly, "I promise you that I will kill your young master as soon as possible so that you can freely follow me to the ends of the earth to see the ebb and flow of the tide and the blossom and wither of the flowers." Hearing this, Sang Sang turned around and looked at his face seriously. Wu Dao looked at the little handmaiden's serious expression and became more and more intoxicated. He reached out his hand and wanted to touch her face. As his fingertips approached the slightly dark face, he seemed to be able to clearly feel the clear and intoxicating smell of Sang Sang seeping into his body. He breathed a little quickly and said very seriously, "I have never met a girl who can make me so excited in my life. You must be mine." When he said these words, his expression was solemn and dignified, without any greedy or infatuated expression. His tattered monk robe was fluttering in the wind, but every pore on his handsome face seemed to be flowing with a feverish body fluid, and every word seemed to spread obscenity into the wind. Sang Sang took a step back to avoid the wet and sticky fingers that were like the tongue of a poisonous snake. She looked at the monk's slightly bulging crotch. There was no disgusting or even any emotion on her face. She turned around and reached out to take a basin. The wooden basin was filled with yesterday's vegetable washing water, which was specially stored for flushing the toilet. The old man sneaked back to the backyard and took out the basin of water. He waited calmly by the side. Sang Sang took the basin of water, raised her arms and splashed the water in front of her. There was a splash. The dirty water mixed with mud splashed on Wu Dao, drenching him from head to toe. 2 yellow and smelly rotten vegetable leaves drooped on his shiny bald head. The dignified and serious expression on his face suddenly froze. With a bang, the wooden door of the old brush pen shop was closed tightly. Wu Dao, who was soaking wet, stood at the bottom of the stone steps in a daze. After a long time he came to his senses. He reached out his hand to wipe off the muddy water on his face. He slowly picked off 2 rotten leaves from the top of his head. A smile gradually appeared on his solemn face. During the 2 encounters with Sang Sang, he did not hide his greed, excitement, and fanaticism. But at this time, a basin of water was poured over his head, and his heart was drenched. For the first time, the smile on his face showed coldness and indifference. That was because Wu Dao was very pained and angry. He did not understand why this little maid would treat him like this. He had lowered himself to please her, to bring her into his room and take care of her on top of the brocade quilt. Was there anything wrong with that? Shouldn't you feel honored and then faint from happiness? How dare you splash water on me? However, because of this, he was more interested in Sang Sang. Under the cold smile, his heart, which wanted to possess her and plunder her clean body, beat faster and more excitedly. The men of the Fish Dragon Gang, who had been monitoring the Lin 47th Street, noticed the movement in front of the old brush pen shop. Several men in cyan came over and surrounded Wu Dao. They lowered their voices and said coldly, "The one who lives in this shop is Mr. Chi's friend. If you don't want to live to see tomorrow's sun, you'd better leave now and never come back." Wu Dao, the love monk, came from the unknown place, so he did not care about these secular Jianghu people. However, Chang'an was full of hidden dragons and crouching tigers. There were many powerhouses in the Tang Empire. Even he dared not to be too presumptuous. Moreover, it was not night yet, and there were many people pointing at him in the alley, which was very inconvenient. After a moment of silence, he looked into the shop through the wooden door and said softly with a smile, "I will come back." After saying this, he did not care about the Fish Dragon Gang members in cyan clothes, trousers and shoes. He lightly brushed his monk robe, turned around and indifferently walked out of the Lin 47th Street. His monk robe swayed slightly, and his straw shoes crushed the fallen dead leaves for a long time. The shadow cast by the bare branches of the winter tree covered his calm face. On the night when he climbed the mountain on the 2nd floor of the academy, he was slightly punished by Master Yen Sei. Then he temporarily left Chang, and to travel in the mountains in the south. He had not been in the Tang Empire for several months, and even rarely saw people. Therefore, he did not know what happened after spring. He did not know who the little handmaiden who made him inexplicably excited was. He did not even know who Ning Kei was. He just hated a guy named Zhong Dajuan. Spring passed and winter arrived. It was getting colder and colder. Time always diluted many things such as fear. Wu Dao plucked up his courage and returned to the Tang Empire. Through some channels, he knew that Master Yen Sei seemed to be worried about something recently. He thought that the horrible divine talisman master would not remember him, so his fear gradually disappeared. Then he bravely came to the capital Chang'an. Because he missed the little handmaiden very much. He wanted to have her very much. Seemed to be fate or lucky chance. He saw her on the second day after he entered Chang'an. He followed her all the way from the princess mansion to the Lin 47th Street. He could not suppress his excitement and knocked on the wooden door of the old brush pen shop. Finally, he got a basin of dirty water and 2 pieces of rotten vegetables. It did not matter. The passion and the inexplicable attraction in his heart could not be extinguished by a basin of water. He was Wu Dao, the love monk. Since he left the Xiankong temple, he had traveled around the world. Whether it was the Yueluan kingdom or the South Jin kingdom, countless girls from rich and poor families had fallen for him. How could he be frustrated in front of a little handmaiden? Wu Dao smiled and walked in the alley under the winter trees. Thinking that his wish was about to be fulfilled, he felt happy and calm. The old man looked through the frame of the wooden door and looked at the back of the young monk who was walking to the entrance of the alley. He thought in silence, a lascivious monk could actually feel the uniqueness of Sang Sang. The Xiankong temple is indeed extraordinary. Walking back to the backyard, he found that the basin of water for washing vegetables was thrown to the corner. Sang Sang did not return to the table to eat. Instead, she squatted beside the stove and stared at the weak but pure divine light on her fingertips in a daze. "You don't want to eat anymore?" the old man asked. Sang Sang shook her head and flicked her fingers. The dry firewood in the stove was quickly ignited. However, she frowned. The old man smiled and said, "There are people in Buddhism who are crazy about karmic cultivation. That's probably why the monk was crazy." Sang Sang ignored him. She held her chin and stared at the burning firewood in the stove. She was seriously thinking about how to quickly improve her divine skill. Her current state was too low. The Haotian divine light that she could condense was weak and weak. Its power was similar to that of ordinary fire. It could ignite firewood, but it could not deal with those powerful cultivators. The old man looked at the determined expression on her little face and sighed. He said, "Mental obstacles are very bad for cultivation." Sang Sang did not turn her head and said softly, "He said he wanted to kill young master as soon as possible." She said nothing else and did not make any request. But the old man knew very well why she was so eager to improve her state. She wanted to kill the young monk as soon as possible. The old man looked at Song Song's back and smiled without saying anything. The night had just arrived. The twilight was still stubbornly in the west. It was dinner time. There was no one in an alley in the east of Chang'an City. The winter trees along the alley drew countless irregular small squares in the dark sky. Wu Dao withdrew his gaze from the sky and was about to move forward with a smile. However, the next moment his pupils suddenly shrank. There was a person at the entrance of the alley. He could not see his face clearly in the dim light. But judging from his stooped body, he should be an old man. What made him vigilant was that he did not know when the old man appeared at the entrance of the alley. Wu Dao was silent for a moment and walked toward the entrance of the alley. He was closer and could see the face clearly. He found that he had seen this old man before. It was in the shop on Lin 47th Street. The basin of water left for washing vegetables was in the hands of this old man. The old man standing at the entrance of the alley looked at him and smiled. He said kindly, "You can see Song Song's potential. You have a good eye. Among the young cultivators you are outstanding." Wu Dao gently raised his hand and slowly stroked his bald head. His movement was very natural and unrestrained. But he could still feel the slippery water and the 2 sticky rotten leaves between his fingers. But he did not want to do anything. Because this stooped figure who looked like an ordinary old man was definitely not an ordinary person. Because he could block his way at the entrance of the alley without Wu Dao noticing. And because he knew what cultivation was. After all, Wu Dao was a proud young man. He thought that he was on par with Prince Long Qing. He would never accept an unknown old man teaching him a lesson. He proudly said, "So her name is Sang Sang. I see. You can leave now." The old man smiled and said, "I know you are from Xiankong Temple." Wu Dao's expression changed slightly. He did not expect that the old man could see through him at a glance. The old man calmly said, "Xiankong Temple rarely expelled disciples. But your state is much lower than Qin Yan's. Naturally, you are not qualified to represent the temple in the world. So I don't understand why you appear in the secular world." Wu Dao's expression changed again. He did not expect that the old man knew so much about Xiankong Temple. He even knew senior brother Qin Yan. He subconsciously became alert. His ragged frock danced in the wind. He looked at the old man and said in a low voice, "Since you know that I come from the unknown place, why do you still dare to block my way?" The old man smiled and said, "The so-called unknown place is just a place that people don't know about. Once people know about it, they will know. So the name of a temple is something that has no power or meaning." Hearing this, Wu Dao became more alert. He looked at the old man in silence. Let's say that many people in Chang'an City know about Xiankong Temple and Jishou Abbey. Moreover, the academy is at the foot of the mountain in the south of the city. So your background is nothing to the people in this city. It's just that Chang'an City has been distracted by something recently. Yinsei has no time to care about you and others have no time to care about you. That's why you can be so presumptuous. Otherwise, do you really think that the name of Xiankong Temple can frighten the Tangs? The old man looked at him and continued, "That matter has something to do with me. It seems that it's mostly my responsibility that you can behave like this in Chang'an City. But I didn't expect that you would harass my female disciple." Wu Dao vaguely guessed the identity of the old man. In his eyes, the hunched and thin body suddenly became extremely tall. He suppressed the shock in his heart and hurriedly bowed to the old man. He changed his attitude instantly and said with great humility and politeness, "Sir, I am the one who did this. I will leave immediately." The old man looked at him and said nothing. The alley was quiet and the atmosphere of death lasted for a while. The young monk vaguely understood something and his voice became hoarse. He looked at the old man and said in a low voice, "Even if you are a bigwig in the West Hill Divine Palace, I am still from Xiankong Temple. Besides, my master is a preaching monk in the temple. I heard that he met you once by chance." The old man still did not say anything and just looked at his eyes calmly. Wu Dao felt his body was extremely stiff. He forced himself to suppress the fear in his heart and bit his tongue hard to calm himself down. He said, "I admit that the preaching monk of Xiankong Temple is not my master. He is my father and I am his illegitimate son. That's why I have to leave. Please have mercy on me." The old man finally responded. He slowly shook his head and said, "I have betrayed the divine hall and left Peach Mountain. In this situation my heart has already been freed from the shackles and I am free. Not to mention your father, even if the devil's doctrine comes back to life, Xiankong Temple, Jishou Abbey, and the academy come together, I can still ignore them." Wu Dao's tattered monk robe slightly trembled in the night wind. He looked at the old man and asked in a trembling voice, "How can you forgive me for the mistakes I have made inadvertently? I said that you have good eyesight and can see Song Song's potential. But that's just the surface. You still don't understand how important Sang Sang is to me. When she frowns and is unhappy, the world in my eyes is no longer bright." The old man's tone became more and more serious, especially the last sentence. 2 lines of cold sweat slowly flowed down from Wu Dao's smooth head. He tremblingly begged, "I was blind before. Please forgive me." The old man raised his slender index finger to the cold winter breeze and said, "No, your eyes are blind now." Wu Dao understood this sentence and felt great fear. He screamed and stretched out his hands from his monk robe. He made an exquisite emblematic gesture of the Buddhism sect and drew an obstacle. His monk robe fluttered and he rushed to the back of the alley. The Buddhist sect's handprint exuded an exquisite and grand aura, but when it came into contact with the candle-like flame on the old man's finger, it was like snow meeting the spring sun, or mud entering the basin used to wash vegetables, instantly disappearing. Wu Dao's figure seemed to be tied up by the light of the flame. His feet in straw sandals could not leave the ground. His body was stretched like a shadow, but he could not go far. He looked at the candle-like flame between the old man's fingers and his eyes were full of fear. The milky color of the flame occupied his black pupils and then quickly expanded, drowning out the fear. Then his black pupils were burning. Shrill screams sounded in the quiet alley. Light is pure and clean, so it is the purest and easiest to be polluted. Light is pure and cold, so it is the most fanatical and cruel. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 290. When the old man returned to the old brush pen shop on Lynn 47th Street, Sang Sang was still squatting in front of the stove, frowning at the burning firewood and thinking about the divine skills she had learned daily. "Let's eat," the old man said. Sang Sang had been in a trance and did not notice that the old man had left for a while. She was startled when she heard this. She stood up and looked at the edge of the old man's wet clothes. She vaguely understood something, and her lips slowly curled up into a smile. The old man also smiled and sat down at the table. Sang Sang didn't ask him what he had done when he left the old brush pen shop. She served him a bowl of rice and heated the yellow croaker. She picked up the fattest one and put it on the rice pile in his bowl. Then she poured a spoonful of delicious steaming soup. "What did Aunt Wu cook for lunch?" "Lettuce with chopped garlic." Sang Sang asked, "Is it delicious?" The old man answered, "Not bad. But I don't understand why she didn't put salted fish in it." Sang Sang raised her head and asked in confusion, "Why did she put salted fish in it?" The old man was puzzled and looked at her little face. "But you put it in when you made lettuce last time." Sang Sang lowered her head and said, "When young master made lettuce, he didn't even put chopped garlic in it." The old man was startled and sighed with emotion. "Well, I remember that the vegetables we ate in the Taoist temple didn't even have oil. I don't know why. Now that I'm old, I'm coveting these extravagant pleasures." Young master said it's easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality. Everyone is the same. Teacher, you don't have to blame yourself. Sang Sang comforted him. The next day at dawn, the old man got up and carefully folded the bedding on the table and put it back in the corner behind the shelf. Then he opened the door of the old brush pen shop and looked at the distant morning light, squinting his eyes. Last night, Sang Sang told him that it's easy to go from frugality to extravagance, but difficult to go from extravagance to frugality, which somehow touched him. He found that he was too coveting the life in the old brush pen shop and forgot to look for the shadow of the night. They still had hot and sour noodle slice soup in the morning. When the old man was about to wash the dishes, Sang Sang signaled her to let him rest. The old man smiled and said that he was going out for a walk today and might not come back for lunch. It's good to go out for a walk. It's not good to be cooped up at home all day. After thinking for a while, Sang Sang took out a piece of silver from her belt and handed it to him. She told him, "If you're tired and want to sit in a tea house, just sit there. Don't be stingy with money. Just don't go too far. If you can't remember the way, don't be embarrassed to ask others. People in Chang'an are very friendly. If you can't remember the way, just find a casino and tell them that you are Mr. Chi. Someone will take you back." The old man was afraid of his female disciples nagging, so he carefully took the silver fragments and put them in his pocket. After repeatedly saying yes, he left the room. After leaving Lynn 47th Street, he went all the way to the north, passing through the Imperial Palace in the eastern city and exiting Chang'an, and through the Xuanwu Gate. Finally, he came to a hill covered with winter snow in the north of the city. Looking afar from a high vantage point, one could naturally see into the distance. The old man looked towards the north in silence. The morning star was dim, as if it was about to be absorbed into Haoyin's body of light. The plum trees in the back garden of the Southern Gate Temple were covered with a thin layer of snow. The nation master Li Qingshan leaned lazily on the windowsill, looking at the snow on the plum trees and the little buds that seemed to never bloom. Suddenly he coughed violently. The sound of his coughing echoed in the quiet hall of the Taoist temple. It sounded extremely painful. Releasing the handkerchief that covered his mouth, the bright red blood stains on the snow-white handkerchief looked like plum blossoms in full bloom. He angrily looked at the plum trees outside the window and scolded. They should have bloomed in the winter, but they never did. You just had to let me bloom a few first. The Taoist nuns and Taoist boys of the southern gate silently waited outside the hall. Their faces were full of worry, but no one dared to enter. He Mingqi walked over with a bowl of medicine and signaled a senior sister to take the yellow paper umbrella away from his armpit. He walked up to the dark, smooth paulownia floor and walked behind Li Qingshan. He said painfully, "Master, you can't do divination anymore." Li Qingshan took the bowl of medicine and slowly drank it. He folded the blood-stained handkerchief and wiped away the medicine left on his beard. He looked at his favorite disciple and said expressionlessly, "Wei Guangming showed up last night. He is indeed still in Chang'an. He is limited to the 3 workshops, but he seems to be leaving. We have to hurry up on this matter." He Mingqi took the bowl of medicine and said, "The military ministry and the Imperial Center administration have already begun their preparations. They are just worried that they will alarm that person, so they haven't entered the North Street of the fragrance workshop to search yet. Only Uncle Master is there now." Thinking about how his senior brother was currently searching for that powerful, terrifying bastard in the eastern city all by himself, Li Qingshan nodded after a very long period of silence. He said nothing more. He waved his hand, dispersing the people outside the hall and dismissing the disciples. A black horse carriage was traveling slowly on the streets of the eastern city of Chang'an. If one did not look closely or even touch it with their hands, it would be difficult to discover that the carriage was made of steel. There were even some complicated and indescribable patterns carved on it. The specially made wheels rumbled on the hard stone road, appearing extremely heavy. Master Yen Sei leaned on the beautiful soft seat in the carriage. His triangular eyes were greedily searching for the trace of the great divine priest of light through the curtain. There was no serious expression on his old and wretched face. If they really met, they would fight. If they really couldn't beat each other, they would die. It was not a big deal even if they stamped their legs and breathed their last. As long as one was human, that day would come. What's more, I already have a successor. The cornice of the Spring Breeze Pavilion, which was newly built a year ago, passed by the window. Master Yen Sei suddenly thought of Chao Xiaoshu, and then his disciple who had been missing since he left. That disciple was a student of the 2nd floor of the academy. Master Yen Sei naturally did not care about his safety. He just thought that he might not have a chance to meet him again, so he inevitably felt a little regretful. At this moment he remembered that before Ningke left Chang'an, he had carefully asked him to help look after the little handmaiden named Sang Sang. But these days he was busy with that matter and actually forgot to see her. The old Taoist shook his head and thought that since he happened to be looking for that old guy in the eastern city today, it would be good to have a look after him after finishing his business. Today, the first person to come to the old brush pen shop was not Master Yen Sei, nor was it the old man who looked at the north outside of Chang'an City. Instead, it was a young fat man. When the fat man jumped off the carriage, the flagstones on the Lin 47th Street did not tremble like an earthquake, but the flesh on his round face really rippled for a long time. The young fat man pushed open the closed door of the old brush pen shop and sat down on Ningke's usual round chair. He felt that the flesh on his thigh was a little painful, so he spat out a few words angrily and then shouted, "Serve the tea." He really did not regard himself as an outsider. Sang Sang was preparing pine branch smoked bacon in the backyard, which was a craft she had just learned from Aunt Wu. She was going to make dozens of kilograms of bacon to surprise Ning Quebec. Suddenly she heard the shout from the front and thought that the shop door had been closed recently. She could not help but feel a little surprised, so she took a towel and walked into the front shop while wiping her hands, and closed the shop door immediately. The young fat man saw that the skinny and dark little handmaiden who came over ignored him and went to close the shop door first. He could not help but be slightly stunned, and then he frowned and said, "The shop door is closed in the daytime. How can we do business?" Sang Sang explained, "If the shop door is open, the threshold will be trampled by people who come to rob the calligraphy sections." The young fat man was stunned for a while and thought that it was indeed reasonable. He actually forgot Ningke's great reputation in Chang'an. He looked at the little handmaiden and asked, "My name is Chun Pippi. Have you ever heard of me from Ningke?" Sang Sang was not surprised when she heard the name. She slightly bowed and said, Sang Sang greets you, child Chan. Chan Pippi rubbed his round and cute chin and looked up and down at the skinny little girl in front of him. He suddenly shook his head and said, Ningke really has a reason to ask me to take care of you. Although I was born with an extraordinary temperament and I can tell that I'm not an ordinary person, you are still too gullible. I'm afraid there will be problems. Sang Sang said, I know you are Chun Pippi. She had been to the academy several times, but the two had never met each other. Chun Pippi believed that there was absolutely no problem with his arrogant memory, so he asked confusedly, Why are you so sure that I am a genius? Sang Sang looked at him and explained seriously, Young master often mentioned you. He said that people who are so fat but not ugly are not wretched and disgusting. He even said that there are not many good-looking people. So I know you are you. Chun Pippi's right hand that was rubbing his chin slightly stiffened. He wondered how Ningke had slandered him in front of the little handmaiden. He also felt that although the evaluation mentioned that he was fat, it seemed to be somewhat useful. He did not know how to answer. Let's not talk about this. Chun Pippi coughed twice and pretended to be serious and mature. He looked at Sang Sang and said, Today I come here to see you at Ningke's request. After all, as a senior brother, I have the responsibility and obligation. He very much hoped that Sang Sang could show a moved expression, but Sang Sang obviously did not have such a reaction. She just looked at him expressionlessly and softly thanked him. Then she went to make a bowl of cheap jasmine tea for him. Chun Pippi looked at her back and said, Youngest brother said that he would invite me here for a meal. He said that you are good at cooking. Sang Sang looked at his chubby face and frowned. No wonder he looked like this. But she did not intend to keep him. She put the teacup beside him and softly said, When young master comes back, Sang Sang will cook for young master Chan. What she wanted to express was very obvious. Ningke should wait for him to invite you for a meal. It was impossible for you to barge in and ask for food. Don't you need to add more food with more chopsticks? With your figure you need at least 2 more dishes, right? If it has to be meat dishes, how much more will it cost? Hearing this, Chun Pippi's self-esteem was hit. Looking at the jasmine petals in the bowl, the fat on his face slightly twitched. He had to decide to tell the truth. Ningke said that there is a person smarter than me in this shop. I always think it is impossible, so I want to confirm it. Sang Sang looked around the shop and did not find anyone hiding. Chun Pippi covered his forehead and said helplessly, He said that the smartest person in the world is you. Sang Sang was stunned. She thought that Ningke always said that she was stupid. How could he say that she was smart? Although she was very happy to be praised by young master as the smartest person in the world, she was still very confused about this statement. She frowned and thought for a long time. Suddenly she thought of something and said shyly, I am not smart. I just have a good memory. Chun Pippi looked at her with a scornful smile and said, I don't believe that there is anyone in the world who is better than me in memory. Sang Sang looked down at the small toe of the cotton skirt and did not want to argue with him. Ningke's cultivation is not good, and his knowledge is also extremely poor. My talent was once recognized by Hautian Taoism and the back mountain of the academy. I don't know what he is thinking. How dare he say that you are better than me? Seeing her like this, Chun Pippi became even more angry and said angrily, Why are you looking at the shoe? Do you think I will make things difficult for you? Although she knew that Ningke was close to this young master Chan, Sang Sang, who was quiet and even a little dull, was a little angry when she heard him mock her young master. She looked up at Chun Pippi's eyes and said very seriously, My memory is also recognized by the city of Wei. This was the truth. During the years she lived in the city of Wei, she was always the most popular notary because she had the best memory and could not lie. However, the city of Wei and the Jishou Abbey, the difference between the two places was too big. But Sang Sang still looked so serious and did not feel embarrassed at all. It was as if she wanted to tell Chun Pippi that since the city of Wei recognized her good memory, then it was really good. As long as it was recognized in the world, as long as there were 2 people, they would not recognize each other. This was probably the principle that there was no second place in martial arts, especially when facing Sang Sang's temperament. Chun Pippi wanted to prove that he was smarter and had a better memory than her. But it was useless to rely on words. He had to show some real skills. Let's compete, Chun Pippi said. Sang Sang was not interested in competing with others in terms of intelligence or memory. She thought of the pine branches under the cured meat in the backyard and would not agree to his request. She walked back to the backyard and picked up the pine branches with a wooden stick to make the smoke bigger. Then she took out a new urn from the kitchen and squatted by the well to wash it carefully. A few days ago she made a pot of chicken soup. The old man drank it happily and dipped a lot of soup in his beard. She thought that the young master also liked to drink the chicken soup she made. If she used the old urn to make chicken soup when he came back, the amount might not be enough. So she went to a small shop in Omping Lane and bought a new urn. She thought that she could make 2 urns of chicken soup in the future, which should be enough. Chun Pippi looked at the back of the little handmaiden who was busy and kept pestering her. I don't care. You have to defeat me with something today. Otherwise I won't let you go. Are there any books in the shop? Let's compete in reciting books. The one who loses will treat the other to dinner. If you think it's boring, let's bet money. Hearing the word money, Sang Sang suddenly stopped washing the urn. She looked back at Chun Pippi. Then she stood up and wiped her little red hands on her apron. She turned around and walked into the bedroom. After a while she came out with a little red face. She said shyly and regretfully, Young master, I can't understand those talisman books, and I can't read other book. Have I not spoken for a long time? Well, I waved my hand. Hello everyone. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 291. The regret on her slightly dark face was very clear. Obviously, Sang Sang thought that as long as she could find the book, she would definitely win. Then she could win a lot of money from her young master, the fat senior brother. As for her shy blush, it was because the books Ning Ke brought back from the academy cave were a little indecent, of course. Chun Pippi was a smart person, so he could clearly understand what the little handmaiden was thinking from her expression. He couldn't help but feel humiliated by being disdained and ignored. He jumped up and said, Find another way. Sang Sang stared at him with her eyes wide open, thinking that this person was really interesting. The soles of his shoes were not more than 2 inches off the ground, but when he landed, he made such a big movement that she was even a little worried whether the new urn would be shattered. Chun Pippi was indeed a smart person, but he felt uncomfortable because he was too smart. He could clearly understand Song Song's meaning from her eyes, so he could not help but feel even more humiliated. He hurriedly put his hands on his waist to steady his slightly trembling fat, and said sadly, according to Ning Ke's words, It hurts my self-esteem. If I don't win today, I will write my name upside down. Sang Sang thought that if his name was written upside down it would still be Pippi, unless he added his surname. But after all, she was not a competitive little girl. The reason why she gradually changed her mind was because of the silver, so she did not point this out, but looked at him seriously and asked Chan Xiaoya, How much do you want to bet? Chun Pippi stretched out a finger and said seriously, 100 taels. Song Song's willowy eyes suddenly brightened, and she asked, What do you want to bet, child Chun? Chun Pippi asked, What do you have most in your shop? Sang Sang frowned and thought for a moment. She gently bit her lower lip and thought that Child Chun was the closest disciple of her young master, so he should not have any evil thoughts. She took off her apron and went into the inner room. Chun Pippi looked at the tightly closed door and thought of something. He could not help but be shocked and shouted anxiously, You can't compare it with Ning Ke's calligraphy sections. It's not fair for you to read them every day. Sang Sang came out with a big box in her arms and said to him, Do you want to bet with the banknotes? Chun Pippi looked at the thick banknotes in the box and could not help but feel shocked. He thought that Ning Ke could not even afford to treat him to a few bowls of crab porridge, but he had hidden such a rich amount of money at home. He was really stingy to the extreme. After cursing secretly, he asked in confusion, How do you want to bet the banknotes? Every banknote has a unique code on it. She spoke a little faster than usual, as if she was worried that the other party would not agree to her proposal. No one will be bored enough to read this. Chun Pippi thought about it and felt that it was a good suggestion. In order to prevent counterfeits, all the large banks had their own unique banknotes coding system. The numbers on the banknotes were not just numbers and there were no fixed rules. It was extremely difficult to remember, so it was most suitable to be used as a competition target. Chun Pippi said, "Yes, let's use this." Sang Sang smiled foolishly and said, "Look and remember at the same time. Young master, you recite first." Chun Pippi waved his hand and said generously, "How could I take advantage of a little girl like you? You carry it first." Tong Baochen 288994 wins G generally Feng 455. EMO Xian Bao Insai 975246 Chess I Soup 1. As Song Song's clear voice echoed in the backyard, Chun Pippi's face became more and more ugly. He no longer cared about the rules of the competition and reached out to grab the banknotes from the table. He found that there was not a single word wrong. Chun Pippi knew very well that the codes on these banknotes were so strange and difficult to remember. If it were him, he could only accurately remember 15 or 16 banknotes. However, at this time, Sang Sang had already memorized the 27th banknote, and judging from her expression and speaking speed, it would not be a problem for her to memorize dozens more banknotes. Chun Pippi rubbed his shocked and numb face. He could not believe his ears. He really could not imagine how there could be someone in the world with such a terrifying memory. He believed that even if even if eldest brother did it himself, he could not be better than this inconspicuous little handmaiden in front of him. Tianxing Yunfeng 4555579. Chun Pippi sadly reached out to stop Sang Sang from continuing. He looked at the banknotes on the table dejectedly. After a long silence he sighed and said, "You don't have to. I admit that your memory is better than mine." Song Song's little face showed a rare sweet smile. She spread her little palm in front of him and said, "Thank you." Chun Pippi took out the banknotes from his arms and put them in her palm. He shook his head and said, "It's really incredible. Really incredible. I can't believe what Ning Ke said is true. There are so many strange people in the marketplace." Sang Sang did not care about his sigh. She folded the new banknotes and the old ones and put them into the box. Then she carefully carried the box and walked into the inner room. Chun Pippi suddenly thought of something and shouted, "Wait!" Song Song's body suddenly froze, and then she quickened her steps and rushed into the inner room. Chun Pippi suddenly came to his senses and said incredulously, "You actually memorized the words on these banknotes." The door was closed, and it was quiet behind the door. Chun Pippi was shocked. After a long time, he looked at the closed door and said bitterly, "I have never heard of anyone who would be so bored to look at the banknotes at home every day. You even memorized the words on the banknotes." Ning Ke acted as if he had never seen silver in his 8 lifetimes. "Today he knows that he is much worse than a greedy girl like you. What kind of people are you and your servant?" Sang Sang tightly held the box of banknotes and nervously leaned against the wooden door. What if he forced his way in? Listening to the loud curses and heart-wrenching education coming from outside the door, she was scared and wanted to laugh. Yes, she had said that no one would be so bored to look at the banknotes, but she did not expect Chun Pippi to really believe her. In her opinion, before Ning Ke's calligraphy could be exchanged for banknotes, the banknotes were the most beautiful pieces of paper in the world. And counting the banknotes in the middle of the night was the most interesting thing in the world. Chun Pippi shouted outside the door, "Come out." Sang Sang leaned against the door with her back, lowered her head and said softly, "The banknotes are mine." Chun Pippi covered his forehead and said, "I admit that they are yours." Sang Sang raised her head and asked curiously, "Then why did I come out?" Chun Pippi said angrily, "The banknotes are yours, but you cheated in the previous round. You have to do it again." Sang Sang lifted the bedboard and hid the box of banknotes. She shouted to the door, "Child Chun, it's getting late. You should hurry back to the academy." Chun Pippi was stunned. He looked at the sky and shouted angrily, "It's not even lunchtime. What do you mean by early?" Sang Sang walked behind the door and said humbly, "Child Chun, I admit that I am not as smart as you and have a better memory than you." Chun Pippi became angrier. He shook his head and sighed. "Tisk tisk K. You are willing to admit anything after winning 100 taels of silver?" Sang Sang said. Young master has said that fame and fortune are fleeting clouds. There is no need to fight for it. Chan Pippi was so angry that he was speechless. He thought that she should at least remove the word fortune from the word fame and fortune. He stepped forward and hammered the wooden door twice, shouting, "Since you are not afraid of losing to me, why don't you play another round with me?" Sang Sang thought that it was indeed reasonable. She had won 100 taels of silver from him, so she had to appease his anger. She pushed the door open and said seriously to Chan Pippi, "But you are not allowed to gamble again. Gambling is not good." How could he be so shameless just so that he wouldn't lose the money back? Chan Pippi was even more speechless. He looked at the little handmaiden's slightly black cheeks and wondered what Ning Ke had taught her. He said in a low voice, "Play chess." Sang Sang answered simply, "I don't know how to play chess." Chan Pippi did not believe it at all. The little girl in front of him had seen banknotes before, but it was not an ordinary person's ability to remember the numbers of more than 30 banknotes. He said, "Of course." Song Song's answer was more concise this time. She nodded and said, "Oh, the chessboard was borrowed from Boss Wu next door." It looked antique, but since Boss Wu opened a fake antique shop, it was naturally fake. However, the black and white chess pieces were sparsely placed on the chessboard, and it did look a little special. Chan Pippi did not feel that he had met his match, nor did he feel proud of being lonely at the top. He pointed at the black chess piece on the chessboard and looked at Sang Sang, puzzled, and asked, "How can I play here?" Sang Sang looked at him with her eyes wide open and asked, puzzled, "Why can't I play here?" Chan Pippi carefully explained to her the problem of such a way to play, and then asked in puzzlement, "You are a very smart person, and you have such a good memory. After understanding the rules, you only need to use your brain a little to figure out the problem. Why don't you think more about it?" Sang Sang answered seriously, "It's hard to think about things. I don't usually think about it." Chan Pippi was dumbfounded, and he could not put down the chess piece between his thick and round fingers. At this moment, a voice came from the door of the old brush pen shop, "Playing chess." Sang Sang looked at the door and said in surprise, "You're back so early?" The old man stepped over the threshold and walked in. He nodded, took out some silver from his waist and handed it to her. "I didn't drink tea." Sang Sang stood up and made way for the old man to take her place. She said, "I'm going to take a look at the bacon." Aunt Wu said that at the beginning of the smoking, the fat of fresh meat would drip oil easily. "I have to be careful of the pine branches burning. You take my place and I'll give you some tea later." The old man nodded and sat down on the chair. He looked up at Chan Pippi and said, "Who should play?" Chan Pippi looked at the old face in front of him, looked at his pure eyes, looked at the holy light in his eyes, and thought of the thing that made Chong and City uneasy these days. This time he was really dumbfounded. His fingers holding the black chess piece slightly trembled, and he did not know whether to put it back on the chessboard or back into the urn. The old man looked down at the situation on the chessboard and continued to ask, "Who should play?" Chan Pippi said honestly, "I should play." After saying this, he stood up and was ready to walk out of the old brush pen shop. The old man raised his head and looked at him in confusion. He said, "I mean, who should play?" Chan Pippi looked at him for a long time, and then he slowly sat back in the chair. The black chess piece between his fingers fell down gently. The old man put his hand into the urn and took out a white chess piece. He did not put it down for a long time, as if he was thinking about how to deal with it. Today is the 3rd anniversary of the birth of the spy. I miss Su Lu, Shi Qing Hai, the 7 groups of tigers, the men in these books. I believe you all know that the simplified Chinese publication of the coming night has begun. I will inform you of the details on another day. As for the simplified Chinese publication of The Spy, I will try my best to finish it as soon as possible. Tomorrow is Saturday, and I wish you all a happy weekend. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 292. Sang Sang didn't know how to play chess, and her moves were terrible. No matter how the old man thought about how to deal with it, he could not turn the situation around. As the chess pieces fell one after another, Black's side was obviously in an advantageous position, and was about to win the mid-game. However, there was no pride on Chun Pippi's face. His expression was unusually solemn and serious. He did not know why there was sweat on his temples, but it kept flowing down his round cheeks. On the contrary, the old man looked calm and relaxed. He drank the tea that Sang Sang had just brought to him and casually put down a chess piece. He sighed and said, "I haven't played chess for 14 years. I'm really rusty." Hearing the words 14 years, Chun Pippi wiped the sweat off his face. Although he didn't show any abnormality, he was screaming in his heart, "It's him, it's him." The old man looked up at him and said with a smile, "I let you play. Why did you leave?" Chun Pippi said respectfully, "Because you are stronger than me. I can't beat you, so I left." The old man looked at the sweat on his face and asked with a smile, "What are you afraid of?" Chun Pippi answered honestly, "I'm afraid of you." The old man shook his head and sighed. "I've served Haotian all my life, but I don't want others to be afraid of me." After a moment of silence, Chun Pippi said, "The original intention and the result often don't correspond." The old man looked at him and suddenly asked, "Your surname is Chun?" Chun Pippi answered, "Yes, I'm Chun Pippi." The old man nodded and said, "You know, I just came out not long ago. When I was in there, I heard that you ran away from the abbey and are now a disciple of the headmaster of the academy." Chun Pippi stared at the chess pieces on the chessboard and said, "Yes." The old man smiled and said, "Then why are you afraid of me? In fact, even if you're not a core disciple of the headmaster of the academy, I won't make things difficult for you for the sake of the abbey. Peach Mountain is not far from the abbey." Chun Pippi raised his arm again and wiped the sweat off his face. He suppressed his nervousness and put a black chess piece on the chessboard in silence. The old man lowered his head to look at the black chess piece he had placed. He gently shook his head and said, "It is said that the affairs of the world are like a game of chess. In my opinion, it is not the chess pieces but the path of the game. No matter how far two lines look, there will always be a time when they meet." Chun Pippi smiled bitterly and said, "I'd rather be a chess piece. Black and white will never come into contact." The old man said, "It's really a coincidence. I met a monk from the temple yesterday." Chun Pippi was slightly surprised and asked, "Someone from Xiankong Temple is in Chong, and what happened next?" The old man said, "He's blind. I think it will take some time for him to regain consciousness." This sentence was said in a calm tone, but Chun Pippi gasped and scratched his head angrily. He stared at the old man and said in a trembling voice, Look, you can blind the people in the temple if you want, but so what if I come from the temple? I'm unlucky to have met you. Yet you insist on telling me not to be afraid. Aren't you teasing me?" The old man smiled and said, "That monk is the illegitimate son of the preaching monk. You are different from him." Hearing this, the anger on Chun Pippi's face gradually disappeared and he became silent again. The old man asked, "How is the abbey dean recently?" Chun Pippi shook his head and said, "I've been in the academy for many years. I don't know how he is now. I guess he's still wandering around." The old man nodded and said, "He's used to staying in the South Sea." At this time, Sang Sang came over with the new urn. The cured meat in the backyard was still hanging on the pine branches. She didn't need to keep an eye on it for the time being, so she came to ask the teacher's opinion. "How about this urn?" The old man looked up and asked curiously, "What is it used for?" "To stew chicken soup." Sang Sang answered. The old man was puzzled and asked, "Isn't there an old urn at home?" Sang Sang explained, "The old urn is too small. When the young master comes back, he'll worry that the stew won't be enough for the three of us." The old man knew how important the young master was in Song Song's heart. Listening to her words, he knew that this girl was anticipating that the young master would live with her after he returned. For some reason, he who had experienced the vicissitudes of the world while sitting on the divine throne, felt a warmth in his chest, and an indescribable feeling of happiness. Then he thought of something and looked at Chun Pippi across the chessboard. He slowly frowned and said, "Do you know my female disciple or her young master?" Hearing this, Chun Pippi was so shocked that he was tongue-tied and could not say a word. The greatest great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace for hundreds of years had actually accepted Ning Ke, a little handmaiden with a black face, as a disciple? Understanding what he was shocked about, the old man smiled and said, "It's all lucky chance. It's hard to explain." Chun Pippi carelessly wiped the sweat on his face with his hands and then wiped the sweat on his palms on his thighs. With these two actions, he resolved his chaotic emotions and said, "Her young master is my younger brother." Then it was the old man's turn to be shocked. He looked at Sang Sang and could not understand why the successor he had found was actually the handmaiden of the core disciple of the headmaster of academy. How did fate arrange this drama? Chun Pippi stared at the chessboard and suddenly gritted his teeth and said, "I know that he knocked you off the divine throne and locked you up in the U prison. When I was a child, he once told me that you were the real great person on the Peach Mountain. So I don't understand. It's rare to meet me in this vast thousand world, but you are still unwilling to do anything." At this time, Sang Sang noticed the strangeness on both sides of the chessboard. Holding the new urn, she looked at the two in surprise. The old man was silent for a while and put a white chess piece on the chessboard. He calmly said, "The Abbey Dean is the Abbey Dean and you are you, and you can't control the relationship between you and the Abbey Dean. So this matter has nothing to do with you." He raised his head and looked at Chun Pippi curiously. He asked, "In your opinion, I am a cruel and murderous person?" Chun Pippi smiled bitterly and said, "The great divine priest of light is pure and quiet. You are known as the person closest to Haotian in spirit. But everyone in the world knows that you are not an ordinary great divine priest of light. In the last 20 years, the hierarch of the divine hall and the great divine priest of judgment and the great divine priest of revelation have not killed as many people as you." The old man sighed softly and said, "This is about the two things that happened more than 10 years ago." Chun Pippi slowly raised his head and bravely looked at the old man's eyes that seemed to be able to see through all the light and darkness in the world. He said honestly and fearlessly, "The headmaster and eldest brother are not here. But since I know that you are in Chang and I have to try to make you stay. Otherwise, I will not have the face to go back to the academy to see second brother." The old man shook his head and looked at him disapprovingly. He said, "Before I was imprisoned, the headmaster of the academy was never the most disgusting kind of moral peddler in the world. Why do you trap yourself like this?" Chun Pippi honestly said, "If I saw you but did not dare to say a word and watched you leave Chang, and second brother would definitely beat me to death when he knew about this." The old man sighed and said, "Mr. Second, you are not young anymore. Why do you still have such a temper?" Chun Pippi sincerely said, "Why don't you let me ask second brother to come and meet you?" The old man smiled and shook his head. He thought that this child's shamelessness was somewhat cute. After thinking for a moment, he turned back to look at Sang Sang and said with regret, "I have to leave." Sang Sang held the new urn and listened for a long time. But she did not understand anything. She only understood the last few paragraphs and realized that the teacher who taught her divine skills was the great divine priest of light from the West Hill Divine Palace. She also vaguely understood that the whole world seemed to be looking for the old man. The new urn did not fall from her arms and smash into pieces on the ground. But she held the edge of the urn tightly because she could not suppress the shock in her heart. The old man looked at her and suddenly said very seriously and solemnly, "The shadow of the dark night is no longer in Chang and now the academy has met me, so I have to leave. Are you willing to go with me?" Sang Sang looked down at the mouth of the urn and smelled the fresh sand. She was silent. The old man was very kind to her. The old man was very lonely. He seemed to put the last weight of his life on her shoulders. The old man hoped that she could leave with him. She knew all these, but she had a reason not to leave. She looked up at the old man and said, "I want to wait at home for young master to come back." The old man had already expected to hear this answer. He smiled slightly, but there was some sadness in his smile. At this moment, a very angry scolding sounded outside the old brush pen shop. "Who knows when your young master will come back? But I am curious, who dares to kidnap my disciple's handmaiden?" Tatter, tatter, tatter. An old Taoist priest walked in with his head up. His triangular eyes flashed with wretchedness and anger when he saw the person beside the chessboard. who was wearing an ordinary cotton-padded jacket and stooping like an ordinary old man. The wretchedness in his triangular eyes suddenly disappeared when he saw the person beside the chessboard, who was wearing an ordinary cotton-padded jacket and stooping like an ordinary old man. He turned into a flowing spring on the peak and was extremely calm. The moment before the storm it was always extremely calm. Great Divine Priest of Light Wei Guangming, who escaped from Peach Mountain, lived peacefully in an inconspicuous bookstore in an inconspicuous side alley of Chang and City for a period of time. Then he met Master Yen Sei on a very inconspicuous winter day. One was the most unfathomable Divine Priest of Light in the West Hill Divine Palace for hundreds of years. The other was the Divine Talisman Master who had gone the furthest in Talisman Taoism for hundreds of years, the trader of Haotian Taoism, and the Minister of Offerings of the South School of Haotian Taoism. What would be the result of such a sudden and inexplicable encounter that even fate would be shocked? There was a long silence in the old brush pen shop, as if it was dead. Master Yen Sei looked at the old man. The old man looked at Master Yen Sei. Sang Sang stared at the two of them. Chan Pippi stared at the chessboard in front of him with cold sweat pouring down. Master Yen Sei sighed and said with emotion, "I have been looking for you in Chang and City for many days." The old man sighed and said with emotion, "I have been hiding from you in Chang and City for many days." Master Yen Sei continued to say with emotion, "I don't want to meet you like this." The old man also said with emotion, "I don't want to meet you either." Master Yen Sei gradually stopped sighing and looked at his old friend who he hadn't seen for many years. He said calmly, "But since we have met, in addition to talking about the old days, there are always some things that must be done." The old man stood up, bowed to his old friend who he hadn't seen for many years, and said calmly, "Please. Tomorrow morning, I will send my leader to the airport to attend the class reunion. I have to drive so I must sleep, so I will update first. After I come back from the airport in the morning and sleep, there should be another chapter in the afternoon or on a rest day I feel uneasy and can't have a good rest. Double monthly votes are really annoying. I don't want to be so diligent. Don't force me like this. This is the plot of an old friend coming to meet me in 20 years. I really want to write slowly and happily. Ah, the monthly votes are about to be used up. You should vote for me quickly to comfort me." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 293. Master Yen Sei walked to the table, looked at the old man, shook his head and sighed. Then he turned to look at Chan Pippi who bowed his head like a quail and shook his head again. He sighed and asked, "How is the Abbey Dean recently?" Hearing this question, Chan Pippi raised his head and answered doubtfully, "You know I have been in the academy these years. How can I know how he is doing?" Yen Sei gently stroked his sparse beard, stared at him and said impatiently, "Since you don't know, and we can't talk about the old days, you have already run out of the Abbey. Do I still need to give you face?" Chan Pippi was more and more confused. He touched the back of his head and said, "Of course not." Master Yen Sei roared, "Then why don't you give me your seat? Why are you standing here like a goose raised by the second brother?" Chan Pippi hurriedly stood up, gave up his seat and stood aside. At this time he realized that this old Taoist actually wanted to play chess with the great Divine Priest of Light. He couldn't help feeling surprised and helpless. He thought, "Who knows what you two old farts are thinking about? Who can think that the great Divine Priest of Light actually invited you to take a seat?" Master Yen Sei didn't care what he was thinking. He gently stroked his Taoist robe and elegantly sat down. He glanced at the situation on the chessboard and found that the black chess piece was in a great advantage. He was very satisfied and looked at Chan Pippi with appreciation. The old man opposite the chessboard smiled and spread his right hand, indicating that it was Yen Sei's turn. Master Yen Sei put down a chess piece and smacked his lips. He said, "How have you been recently?" The old man held a white chess piece and answered softly, "Every year when you go back to Peach Mountain, you will go to the U prison to see me. Of course you know how I've been there. Recently I've been really good." Master Yen Sei stared at the crisscross chess pieces on the chessboard. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "Even if you don't have a good life on Peach Mountain, why do you have to come to Chang'an?" The old man smiled and replied, "That day, your younger brother also asked me this question. Although one of them didn't wear a Taoist robe, there were indeed two old Taoists beside the chessboard, and they were the two most outstanding old Taoists of Haotian Taoism these years. They were qualified to leave their names in history books. Although Chun Pippi was a grand cultivator who had entered the knowing destiny state, and his identity and background were enough to disdain the world, he had to obediently play the role of a student in front of the two old Taoists. He honestly served tea and dared not speak. Master Yensei took a sip of tea and licked off a tea leaf stuck on his front tooth with the tip of his tongue. He frowned and felt the tea was too bad. He looked up and said, "Abby Taoist used to think that you were the Taoist Yen Yen Temple," and said, "Taoist Yen Ti," and said, "You, Taoist God." And Yen was and said, "Abby Yen K Taoist Yen thought the Taoist in and said old, and thought. Yen Taoist Long Taoha thought, Taoist, and said, and, Long and he said, Master Shi, Long he, priest, and said in, and face, Yen, and, here is Chang'an, here is my big tactical array. You can't beat me." The old man nodded. He knew clearly that Chang'an was the legendary God-stunning array. Yensei was the one who controlled the array. As long as he was in Chang'an, he would be invincible. "I still hold the same view." The old man looked at the chessboard and said with a smile, "I'm just an old Taoist who is struggling to survive. It's a big waste to use a big tactical array like Chang'an on me. I think you think so." Master Yensei sighed and said, "It's good to say that we are struggling at death's door. We are all old and are about to return to the embrace of Haotian. It's always good to enjoy the joys and sorrows of the world for a while. If you didn't come this time, I could at least live for a year and a half. I believe you could also have more time." The old man looked at him and said calmly, "You know my eyes can sometimes see some pictures before time, so I know it's hard for me to leave Chang, and this time." Master Yensei shook his head and said, "In this case, why do you have to come here?" The old man said, "Everyone will eventually return to the origin of life and the embrace of Haotian. This can't make me worry. Time is just the order of events. For us who use time, we need to use time to complete the things that should be completed. If we can't complete it, then time is meaningless." Master Yensei was silent. He gently put the black chess piece between his fingers on the chessboard and said, "So you came to Chang, and to go back to the beginning of time and finish the thing that you did in those years?" The old man answered but didn't say anything. Master Yensei also smiled and looked at him. He said, "In the end of cultivation, what we cultivate is the original heart. How can we change our minds when we are old guys who are going to decay? Well, anyway, I have a successor now, so I don't have too much attachment to this world. By the way, you were locked up at that time, so you may not know it." The old man was very clear about Yensei's attainments in talisman Taoism, and how difficult it was for a divine talisman master to find a successor with potential. Hearing that Yensei had found a successor, he couldn't help but be surprised and happy for him. Master Yensei looked at his expression and proudly said, "My apprentice is not an ordinary person. She can understand the essence of talisman Taoism after being drenched in the rain. In the future, her realm will definitely be far higher than mine." I don't want to argue with a boring old man like you about other things, but I can pass on this skill, which is much better than you. The old man smiled and looked at Sang Sang, who had been silent. He said softly, "I also have a disciple, and she is quite good. I think she will be better than your apprentice in the future." In the old man's eyes, Sang Sang was a gift from Haotian and the greatest lucky chance in his life. Even if Yensei was lucky enough to find a successor of divine talisman master, he could not be compared with his beloved apprentice in any case. Master Yensei was slightly stunned. He was shocked that the divine priest of light had found his successor before he left. However, following the old man's eyes, he suddenly found that the so-called successor was actually Sang Sang. The expression on his face instantly became extremely strange. In the shock and astonishment, he began to have an extremely irrepressible feeling of absurdity. "Your apprentice is this black-faced little girl?" The old man looked at him strangely and then said seriously, yes, but Sang Sang is not black-faced. Ha 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 ha. Master Yensei pointed at Sang Sang with one hand and covered his belly, which was aching from laughing too much. He looked at the old man and said, do you know that the apprentice who makes you so proud and coquettish like this is my apprentice's maid? The old man was stunned. He frowned and asked, isn't that person the core disciple of the headmaster of academy? Master Yensei proudly said, taking advantage of the absence of the headmaster of academy, I also grabbed the title of teacher. The old man sighed with emotion and said, I see. I didn't expect that young man to have such great luck. But even if Sang Sang is his maid, so what? In the future, Sang Sang will understand the divine skill that I teach her. Even if she doesn't go to the West Hill Divine Palace to inherit the throne, she will be the most outstanding figure in the younger generation of Haotian Taoism. How can your apprentice compare with her? Master Yensei snorted and scornfully said, not to mention that my apprentice is the future nation master of Tang, and not to mention that she will have any good fortune under the guidance of the headmaster of academy. Just look at the relationship between them. Even if this girl becomes the divine priest of light in the future, she will still have to make the bed for my apprentice and even warm his bed when she meets him. The old man sighed and said, are you very proud? Master Yensei spat and said fiercely, at least I can surpass you in one aspect. Why shouldn't I be proud? It seemed to be a warm conversation between old friends. But between the lines there were countless wind, frost, rain, dew, divine light, and Taoist aura. The childlike stubborn dispute was actually just a play before life and death. At this time, Sang Sang took a broom and clean water from the backyard to clean the spit on the ground. She didn't understand what the two old men were talking about. She just felt that they seemed to be very fierce. She was a little worried that they would quarrel or even fight. Chun Pippi, who had been sitting quietly by the chessboard, heard these words clearly. Being between the aura of the two top figures in the world and feeling the Taoist connotation of the unreleased fighting desire, he was extremely nervous and scared. His fat body was forced to sweat several times and his body was a little weak. He could no longer sit down. He could no longer pretend that nothing had happened, and that this was just two old men bickering under the locust tree by the well at the corner of the street. He stood up and said, panting heavily, can I leave first? The old man and Master Yensei looked at the chessboard and said in unison, no. Beside the chessboard, Chun Pippi was a stabilizer as well as a witness. His origin was a stabilizer, and his identity in the academy was a witness. If he left at this time, Master Yensei couldn't control the old man to leave, and then he would start in advance. Chun Pippi was startled by the two old Taoists speaking at the same time. His chubby body trembled and knocked over the chessboard on the table. Pa 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 pa. The black and white chess pieces fell to the ground and rolled everywhere. Master Yensei looked at the empty chessboard and sighed. It seems that this game can only end here. After a moment of silence, the old man nodded. Sang Sang held the broom and stood aside nervously. Although she couldn't understand what the two old men were talking about, she vaguely felt that something bad would happen soon. One was the teacher of the young master, and the other was her teacher. Sang Sang didn't want them to fight. Fighting was better than playing chess, even if they continued to quarrel during the game. She put the broom aside, squatted down and began to pick up the black and white chess pieces scattered on the ground. Then she came to the table with the chess pieces and put them on the chessboard one by one. Not long after, the situation on the chessboard was restored as before, and no chess pieces were in the wrong position. Fortunately, I had a look at it or there would be no way. Sang Sang patted her chest with some lingering fear, and then looked at the two old men at the table and said, go on. The two old men didn't know what to say. Chun Pippi stared at the black and white chess pieces on the chessboard and didn't know what to say. Sang Sang slightly clenched her hands behind her back, and slowly lowered her head to look at the old shoes on her skirt. She murmured softly, it's done. Why don't you continue? Suddenly, she raised her head and looked at the two old men with her bright willow-shaped eyes. Are you hungry? Then I'll cook noodles for you. How about noodles with fried eggs? To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 294. No scallion. No vinegar. Add more noodles. The last one who made the request was obviously Chan Pippi. Then he looked at the chessboard that had been restored to its original state, and his thick eyebrows were raised. His face was full of frustration and shame, and he actually forgot that he was in an extremely horrible environment at this time. He thought that the little handmaiden could remember all the positions of the chess pieces with just a glance. How could he be proud of his head in front of her? How could he still have the face to say that he was a genius? The old man Wei Guangming looked at Master Yen Sei and said with a smile, "My female disciple is very excellent." Master Yen Sei looked at the thin figure disappearing in the backyard and said with emotion, "She is really amazing." The excellent and amazing that the two old men said had little to do with Song Song's mind, which shocked Chan Pippi. Instead, they were talking about a kind of temperament that only the old men in their state could understand. It was the kind of unique temperament that seemed stupid because of absolute transparency, but actually could accurately and clearly reflect the world. Master Yen Sei withdrew his gaze and looked at the old man and said, "We are all old. Even if we don't fight to death, we are close to death. After all, this is the last time we meet, so let's have a bowl of noodles." The fragrant noodles with fried eggs were served. One bowl without vinegar, one bowl without scallion, and one bowl with noodles over the edge of the bowl. After eating the noodles, the two old men finished the endgame in silence. There was no number, so they didn't know the result. Then they refused Song Song's reward of another bowl of noodles and another game of chess, and began to recall the past. Sang Sang made 3 bowls of tea again, and then she and Chan Pippi each took a small stool and sat down like students to listen to the past. Yen Sei and Wei Guangming were the oldest generation in Haotian Taoism. Although in the past 14 years one was laughing in the world, and the other was imprisoned in the back of Peach Mountain, compared with the time they knew each other 14 years was too short. So the past was very long, and those common memories were very rich. They started from the time when they were still little Taoist. They talked about how they went to the Revelation Institute and how they went to the Jisho Abbey to be appointed as the great divine priest. The two old men talked for a long time and still could not finish. Of course, most of the time it was Master Yen Sei who talked a lot. The great divine priest of light just listened calmly with a smile. Occasionally, in order to avoid misunderstandings between the two juniors, he would interject to argue. For example, the beard of the headmaster of the Revelation Institute was burned by the current hierarch lord, not burned by him with divine skills. Also, on the way to the Jisho Abbey, he did not have diarrhea because of nervousness, but was secretly cast a cold talisman by Yen Sei. Those naughty little Taoist children had become big shots in the world today. The man who once burned the beard of the headmaster of the Revelation Institute had become the powerful hierarch of the Divine Hall. Someone had become Master Yen Sei, and someone had become the Divine Priest of Light. However, as long as one had those times, who could not help recalling them occasionally? These memories were very warm, with a unique feeling of twilight nostalgia. Looking at the warm twilight outside the old brush pen shop, the great Divine Priest of Light found that time passed so fast with these memories, and it was already the real dusk. It was quiet outside the old brush pen shop at dusk, and no sound could be heard in Lin 47th Street. The old man looked outside the door with a smile and did not say anything. "At that time we were young and naughty, but you have always been the smartest and the most honest one." Master Yen Sei looked at him and said, "After your reminder, you found that the little girl Sang Sang is really like you in those days. She is transparent from inside to outside, without any impurities." The old man lovingly looked at Sang Sang on the small bench and said, "I am not as good as her." Master Yen Sei sighed and said, "Those who can sit on the Divine Priest of Light must be so transparent, so that they can be closer to the essence of Haotian than us? But what does transparency mean? Can it reflect the original appearance of the world? If the world is black, you are also black. That's why so many Divine Priests of Light eventually went astray?" The old man shook his head and said with a smile, "Transparency is colorless, but black is colorless and lusterless. You and I are in the world of Haotian full of light. Transparency is light and the enemy of darkness." Hearing the words, enemy of darkness, Master Yen Sei fell into a long silence. After a long time, he slowly raised his head and looked at the old man seriously, saying, Do you still remember Lotus? The old man was slightly stunned and frowned, saying, How can I not remember? Master Yensei asked, Is he light or dark? The old man shook his head and said, When he was on the divine priest of judgment and I was on the divine priest of light, I began to suspect him when I saw the seat of heavenly black jade oozing with dirty blood. But before I exposed him, he saw through fate and left Peach Mountain. Finally, he died under the sword of Mr. Ku. The reason why the Divine Hall never mentioned this and didn't mention this person was that they cared about the reputation of Haotian Taoism. But in my opinion, the 32 petals of lotus, no matter how dazzling and clean they are just some pastel on the petals made of dried mud. Master Yensei stared at his eyes and said in a low voice, After the destruction of the Devil's Doctrine, the Divine Hall recruited many powerhouses of the Devil's Doctrine. If you say that light can't give any chance to the dark, how do you explain this? If the bloody cases in those years were the last resort to destroy the dark shadow, then what about the shadow of the Divine Hall now? The old man said, It's not the same. The dark shadow is the son of Yama. Master Yensei slammed the table angrily and said, Why are you so pedantic? The underworld is just a legend and has never appeared. Back then you violated the hierarch's order and made a bloody storm in Chang and City, but you didn't find the son of Yama. Why are you still so absurd today? The old man said, In fact, both the Abbey Dean and the hierarch believed what I saw. Master Yensei stared at his eyes and said coldly, But the result is that you are locked in the U prison. The old man calmly looked back at him and said, I am the light of the world. Those who follow me will not walk in the dark, but must get the light of life. Those who doubt me will walk in the dark and can't be free. Seeing that he was so stubborn, Master Yensei waved his sleeves angrily and shouted, Then tell me where the shadow of the night you saw was. Where is the son of Yama? Who do you want to kill in Chang'an? The old man said softly, I don't know either. Hearing this answer, Master Yensei was stunned, and a bitter smile appeared on his face. He looked at him and said in a trembling voice, Even you don't know who the son of Yama is and whether he really exists. The great divine priest of light who was as transparent as glass and sincere as a bright lamp did not hesitate to become a big devil with blood on his hands. You were willing to be imprisoned in the U prison for 14 years, which made countless people sad. Don't you regret it at all? The old man was silent for a long time, and a trace of confusion occasionally flashed on his old face. Then the confusion quickly turned into calmness and firmness. But the problem is that I know he exists. Master Yensei frowned and looked at him and said, Then who is he? The old man looked at the dark night that gradually covered the old brush pen shop and calmly said, Since he is the son of Yama, he naturally hides himself very deeply. Even he may not know his true identity until today. You ask me who he is and I can't give you an answer now. But since I could see him in Chang and that year he must exist. Whether he escaped from the general's mansion or survived the corpses in the village of the Yen territory, he is him. Suddenly, the old man frowned and looked at Sang Sang and asked, What's wrong? Song Song's dark little face became a little pale at this time, and her two little hands tightly grasped the hem of her clothes, but her expression was still calm. After hearing the question, she whispered, I don't know why I'm a little tired. The old man said with pity, Then go to sleep quickly. Sang Sang turned to look at Master Yensei and pursed her lips without saying a word. Master Yensei sighed and said, If my disciple knows that I let you not have a good rest, he will definitely not let me go. Go to sleep peacefully. We two old guys won't do anything while you are asleep. We will definitely wake you up. The old man looked at Chan Pippi and said, It's late, and the person you are waiting for is already here. Let's go. Chan Pippi wiped the sweat on his forehead that seemed to never stop today, and very respectfully bowed to the two old men. Then he pushed the door and walked out of the old brush pen shop. The pine branches in the backyard were still smoking. Because Sang Sang forgot to take care of it for a while, the smoke became a little bigger. Probably because of this, Song Song's eyes were a little red because of the smoke. She quietly washed her face and feet, climbed into the cold bed on the north brick bed, and opened her eyes to look at the faint starlight outside the window. She thought that if Ninkei saw the same starlight as her at this time, he might start to talk nonsense again. Because of frugality, the surface of the brick bed was a little warm. This year's Chang and city was colder than last year's, and she still didn't feel warm after lying down for a long time. She couldn't help but put her little hands to her lips and take 2 hot breaths. The starlight shone on her palms, which were full of blood marks caused by her fingernails. Sang Sang had a great fear in her heart when her teacher talked about the general's mansion and the villages in the Yen territory. If she hadn't forcibly calmed her mind with pain, perhaps her body could not help but tremble at that time. She didn't hear Ning Ke talk about the general's mansion, but she knew it, but she didn't ask. She also knew that Ning Ke killed the censor Zhang Yiqi and the blacksmith, and even wrote a not very good poem about it, but she still didn't ask. Ning Ke didn't want to talk about it, so she didn't ask. But as Ning Ke said, she was not stupid, just a little stupid, and when it was necessary to be smart, she was smarter than anyone else, so Sang Sang knew everything. The son of Yama. Sounds like a terrible thing. Song Song's little face was pressed against the cold pillow, and she looked at the winter starlight falling in front of the window. She muttered to herself, "But I've lived with you for so many years, I can only live with you secretly. That's all for today. I hope it's to your satisfaction. Tomorrow, I'll write more chapters and finish this paragraph. If it's good, please give me a vote. If you still have any votes left, whether it's a monthly vote or a recommendation vote, please give them to me. Thank you very much." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 295. I heard that they are playing chess. It's over at dusk. I have to drag you to finish this game with me. Your Majesty, the game of chess will end eventually. I can't sleep well tonight. I have to find some ways to get through this tiredness. In the imperial study deep in the imperial city, Li Zhongyi, the emperor of the Tang Empire, looked at the chessboard in front of him and said angrily. The game of chess had started in the daytime, but it had not reached the middle of the night, which really made him feel a little impatient. Monk Huangyang smiled bitterly and replied, Your Majesty, when you reach the realm of the divine priest of light and Master Yen Sei, you can be regarded as people outside the world. No matter how vigilant we are in the world, it really has little to do with them. The atmosphere in Chang, and tonight was tense and depressing. Except for the shop on Lin 47th Street, the Imperial Palace was naturally the most heavily guarded place. According to the rules, since the nation master Li Qingshan was not here, Monk Huangyang, as the younger brother of the emperor, would not leave His Majesty's side. His Majesty reached out to sweep the chess pieces in front of him, walked out of the imperial study and stood in front of the remnant snowflake tree. He quietly looked at Chang and city under the night sky and suddenly said, Do you believe in the legend of the underworld invasion? Monk Huangyang put his palms together and shook his head after a moment of silence. A gust of night wind blew, and His Majesty coughed. The coughing became louder and louder, and finally he bent down in pain. He waved away those eunuchs and palace maids who heard the coughing and took out a handkerchief from his sleeve to gently wipe the corner of his mouth. Looking at the deep night, he said, I only hope that if the underworld invasion is not a legend, it will come earlier. Monk Huangyang heard the ominous meaning hidden in His Majesty's words. Thinking of the previous coughing, he slightly frowned and looked at His Majesty's back, saying worriedly, Your Majesty's cold deficiency is acting up. You better go back to your room. The emperor shook his head slowly and said, The headmaster once said that my cold deficiency is not serious. As long as I can suppress it, I can't jump out to rebel. If I can't suppress it, then it's my fate. Although Huangyang was the younger brother of the Emperor of Tang, he did not get along with the emperor for many years like the nation master Li Qingshan. Therefore, he did not know the story between the Emperor of Tang and the girl from the Devil's Doctrine. Therefore he was worried and puzzled when he heard this. He thought that even the headmaster of academy could not get rid of the emperor's cold illness completely. When Chun Pippi walked out of the shop, the blazing flames in Lin 47th Street instantly disappeared, leaving only a tall ancient crown. He covered his head with his hands and walked over, standing obediently behind the crown. Second brother looked at the closed door of the old brush pen shop with an indifferent and calm expression, but there was a faint flame of excitement in his eyes, just like the club on his head that was about to burn in the twilight. There was no one in the alley. The doors of the fake antique shop and the grocery store were all closed. A square stool appeared out of nowhere beside the gray wall under the winter tree. Second brother was sitting on the stool with his tall and straight figure, like a pine tree on the edge of a cliff. The delicate and lovely little attendant was quietly guarding him like a white stone under the pine tree. Looking at the closed door, second brother suddenly asked, "They haven't started fighting yet?" Chun Pippi lowered his head and replied respectfully, "They have been talking about the old days." Second brother's serious face showed a displeased expression. He said, "They are all old people after all. They always do things in a sloppy way. Since they all insist that they are right, in the end they still have to use their fists to reason things out. Why do they need to talk about the old days for such a long time? They are so clingy that they don't deserve to be called gentlemen." Chun Pippi wiped the cold sweat on his forehead and dared not to say anything. Second brother's absolutely straight eyebrows suddenly frowned. He gently lifted the front lapel of his gown, and then held the ancient crown that did not move a bit. He said, "They still don't want to fight. Do they want me to wait for a whole night?" Seeing second brother's movement, Chun Pippi knew that second brother was a little impatient to waste time on these meaningless waiting, and was ready to enter the old brush pen shop. Suddenly he was shocked and his back was soaked with sweat again. At this time in the old brush pen shop, such horrible figures as the great divine priest of light and Master Yen Sei were confronting each other. If second brother joined in, who knew how big the storm would be? How many broken tiles would be left in this street? Thinking of this, he could no longer care about the respect he had for second brother, and the fact that second brother hated to be messed up by others. He reached out and grasped second brother's wide sleeves tightly. With a trembling voice, he sincerely begged, "Senior brother, please don't go in again." Second brother looked at the wrinkled sleeves and asked expressionlessly, "If they can enter, why can't I?" According to Chun Pippi's real thoughts, wind, rain, light and color could enter. But the reason why second brother couldn't enter the old brush pen shop was very simple. No matter how many people the two old men in the shop had killed, at least they were calm now. No matter what decision they made, they would think twice in Chong and could still maintain a state of peace for the time being. But according to second brother's temperament, even the direction of his clothes should be classified into the truth, and he insisted on fighting without arguing. Once he entered the old brush pen shop, there would be an earth-shattering fight. What's more, do you think I didn't see the flame of excitement in your eyes when you pretended to be serious and solemn? Do you think I didn't know that you had been suppressed by the headmaster of the academy and eldest brother for too many years, and you couldn't leave Chong and to wander around the world these 2 years because you had to preside over the academy? That's why you were full of fighting desire. Today you finally met the divine priest of light who could be called an opponent. How could you let it go? It didn't matter what he thought. What mattered was that Chun Pippi knew that if he tried to persuade second brother like this, he would definitely be beaten violently and second brother would still walk into the old brush pen shop. So he tried to persuade second brother earnestly. "It's not wrong to be slow. Eldest brother is also very slow, but we still have to wait." Second brother said unhappily, "How can senior brother be the same as others?" Seeing that bringing up eldest brother didn't work, Chun Pippi made up his mind and grabbed second brother's sleeves and whispered a few words. Note, second brother frowned slightly and waved his hand to signal the cute little attendant who had been silently waiting by the side to return to the academy. He adjusted his ancient crown and tidied his clothes. Then he closed his eyes and waited quietly on the stool under the tree. From dusk to midnight, many people came to the Lin 47th Street. The Huaihua general, who looked solemn and iron-blooded, represented the imperial military. The imperial censor, who looked unyielding, represented the civil officials of the imperial court. So did the pale and haggard nation master Li Qingshan. The representatives of all forces of the Tang Empire gathered here for only one purpose. They were here for the stooped old man in the old brush pen shop, for the bloody storm that the old man had set off in Chong, and in the Yan territory, and for the case of Xianwei General's rebellion that had been buried deep in the yellow papers. For more than a decade, the Tang Empire had never looked into that case, because it involved too much and had too wide an impact. It was related to the prince and General Xiahou, and even more related to the West Hill Divine Palace and a more mysterious source. However, the Divine Priest of Light, who had plotted this back then, had betrayed the Divine Hall and come to Chang, and in person. How could the emperor and ministers of the Tang Empire allow him to leave safely again? The Chang and local government and the Fish Dragon Gang were not qualified to attend such a grand occasion. These bigwigs and their subordinates sat expressionlessly under the big umbrellas at the entrance and end of the alley. Because they did not know the situation in the old brush pen shop, no one walked over. Some people had already noticed a weirdo with a tall hat sitting under the gray wall opposite the old brush pen shop, and an extremely fat young man standing beside him. But after knowing their identities, no one dared to express any doubts. Time passed slowly, and the night was full of stars. Li Qingshan walked slowly from the entrance of the alley, walked to the two, and saluted with hands folded in front. He did not say anything, and just silently looked at the closed door of the old brush pen shop like the two. Sang did not know that there were so many unworldly powerhouses and secular bigwigs keeping watch for her outside the old brush pen shop. She just closed her eyes to sleep, thinking that she would not be so sad after falling asleep. She also thought that if the young master knew that the culprit who murdered his family was in the shop in front of him, he would be very sad. Sang thought like this in her half-asleep state, and then she had a dream. She dreamed of her biological parents. Sang did not know who her parents were, and she was very curious or missed this feeling. After all, Ning Ke was only 4 years older than her, and it was difficult for him to completely replace the existence that everyone needed. Until she met an old man in Chang'an, whose cotton-padded jacket was stained with hot and sour noodle slice soup. She felt very close to the old man, and it was a kind of natural closeness. From the old man's eyes, she saw unreasonable and completely unconditional love, just like Ning Quebec. So she thought that she met the existence like her parents, and she began to call him teacher. Sang woke up with a start, and her cheeks were slightly wet. It was silent all night, like a bean oil lamp gradually going out, and the morning light gradually brightened outside the door. No one from the Divine Hall came. You know the style of the empire. Master Yensei sighed and said, in Chang'an we can't use the black cavalry to kill you. If people like us take action, it will only lead to misery and suffering. But the imperial court will not let you go, so now it is a deadlock. The old man was silent. He was very clear that since he was discovered by the Tang Empire today, they would certainly not allow him to escape again. Although he was the divine priest of light in the divine state, when a powerful empire came out with all its strength, he would still be in a desperate situation without the protection of Chang and its residents. I heard you said that you also gambled when you were in the shabby temple in the kingdom of Song. Master Yensei looked at him and said calmly, let's make another bet. It's a bet of life and death. If you win, you can continue to look for the shadow of nightfall. If you lose, you have to leave your life in Chang'an. It can be regarded as an end to the old thing and comfort the thousands of innocent souls who died because of you. The old man was still silent. Master Yensei looked at his eyes and suddenly said, for the sake of your female disciple, gamble with me. The old man thoughtfully stood up and said, that makes sense. I admire you. It's worth it. There were 3 words in this sentence. Yensei did not hesitate to give up the god-stunning array of Chang, and as the background in order to seek a chance to fight. As the controller of the array, as long as Yensei was in Chang, and he would naturally be in an invincible position. No matter how strong the opponent was, he could at least ensure his own safety. As long as it was for Sang, it was worth it to do this gamble that involved life and death, as long as it was for Sang. As for the reason, it was worth it. The old man was the light. If he wanted to keep the light in Song's world, he should make a choice that was truly light for the last time. In a word, everything was for Sang. It was unreasonable for many people, but it was very reasonable for the old man. It was not worth it for many people, but it was very worthwhile for the old man. Sang was a little black handmaiden. Her hair was a little yellow, not good-looking, not to mention beautiful. She looked very inconspicuous, and her temperament was not cute and pleasing. Those who did not know her would regard her as a piece of barnyard grass swaying in the cold wind that could be annihilated at any time. However, those who really knew her would treat her as a treasure. Up until now, only her young master Ningke and her teacher, the great divine priest of light, had known her. So when Prince Longqing smiled and threatened her with words, Ningke anxiously pondered in silence by the Daming Lake and tried hard to break the realm. Then he shot the noble divine son of West Hill with an arrow without hesitation. When Wu Dao made her unhappy and tried to do something to her, great divine priest of light put down the yellow croaker on the table and went to the alley without thinking. He casually pointed at the monk from the unknown place and turned him into a blind man. The morning light came to Old Brush Pen Shop on Lin 47th Street in Chang'an. Master Yen Sei and Great Divine Priest of Light finally finished talking about the old days and negotiations hidden in their words. They decided to use a relatively simple way to resolve the current deadlock and write an end to the history of more than 10 years. The old man opened the shop door slowly with his old hand. He looked back and saw that Sang Sang had come behind him. She was half awake and half asleep all night. When there was a slight movement in the front shop, she woke up and rushed over. The old man looked at her quietly and suddenly said, "Do you want to have a look?" Sang Sang nodded hard. The old man glanced at Master Yen Sei. Master Yen Sei smiled and said, "She is indeed the best witness." The old man looked at Song Song's little face, paused for a moment and said with a smile, "Take the new urn. It has not been stewed with chicken soup, so there is no grease. It should be suitable to store ashes later." Hearing this, Master Yen Sei said, "If you have an old urn, take it with you. Speaking of which, you have earned a lot of money from my chicken soup calligraphy, but I haven't tasted your chicken soup yet." Sang Sang lowered her head and said softly, "If you don't go out, I will stew chicken soup for you today." The old man looked at her tenderly and shook his head. Then he looked at Yen Sei and said, "The old urn has grease, and the ashes are easy to stick to the wall." Master Yen Sei flicked his sleeves and walked out of the old brush pen shop with a big smile. He said, "My Taoist robe has always been greasy in my life, but I have never disliked it. Do you think I will care about whether the ashes will be stained by grease after I die?" Note: I really can't think of how to persuade second brother. I have spent more than an hour on this reason, but I still can't figure it out. I can't persuade such a stupid person. Why don't I just let him appear? That won't do. The academy must have a firm stand on this occasion. Chun Pippi is not a good choice. In addition, no matter the new urn or the old one, they are all my favorite urns. This is the first chapter of today. On the first day of the month, please support the monthly vote. Thank you. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 296. As the morning light came, Chang'an City slowly woke up from its sleep. The door of the old brush pen shop was pushed open, and those bigwigs in Lin 47th Street were immediately alert. It was colder this year than in previous years, but it had not snowed for many days. The remaining snow under the tree roots turned gray day after day. However, when the door was pushed open with a squeak, it began to snow. Second brother looked up at the sky, and then looked at the door that had just been opened. At the entrance of the alley, a black carriage slowly came in the wind and snow. The heavy body made of metal slightly trembled the bluestone in the alley, and the wheels made a low sound like thunder. Master Yen Sei and Great Divine Priest of Light walked out of the shop and sat in the carriage. A moment later, a thin figure also walked out of the old brush pen shop. Sang Sang held the new urn in her left arm and the old one in her right arm. It seemed to be a little heavy, and she struggled to climb into the carriage. The black carriage drove to the city gate in the wind and snow. It was still quiet in Lin 47th Street. The general at the head of the alley and the censor at the end of the alley did not move, and looked solemnly at the black carriage leaving. Second brother stood up from the stool, and with his hands behind his back, he walked to the city gate with Chun Pippi following the track of the black carriage. Until then, other bigwigs in the alley dared to move. The general ordered the Yulin royal guards hidden everywhere in Chang'an City to return to camp. The censor went straight to the palace to report. Nation Master Li Qingshan looked at the carriage gradually disappearing in the wind and snow of Chang, and slowly bowed to him. There was a not-so-famous mountain in the northern suburbs of Chang, and city. The mountain was not high, and there were no historical records of scholars to help it. The wild trees on the mountain also lacked some beauty, so there were few tourists on weekdays. This morning the wind and snow came suddenly, and the road was covered with snow, and it was difficult to walk on. The mountain was even more quiet, as if it was not in the world. The black horse carriage stopped at the foot of this nameless mountain. The wheels of the carriage, which were made of refined iron, had already cracked the ground beneath them. If they were to forcefully ascend the mountain, they would probably leave 2 terrifying wounds on the muddy mountain path. 2 old men were walking on the mountain path. Their cotton-padded jackets were a little old, but they were very clean. They trembled slightly in the mountain wind. Their Taoist robes were still new, but they were stained with a lot of grease and dirt, fluttering in the wind. Regardless of whether it was their clothes or their slightly stooped old bodies, the 2 elders on the mountain path were very ordinary. However, when they walked through the wind and snow, they gave off a feeling of floating away from the world. At the foot of the mountain path, Sang Sang, who was thin and weak, held 2 heavy urns in her arms. She lowered her head and pursed her lips, staring at the endless stone steps under her skirt. She struggled to catch up with the 2 old people in front of her, who seemed to be about to leave the world. Master Yensei pulled out a snow branch from his face and sighed. I don't know whether the new urn will be filled or the old one will become heavier. Great Divine Priest of Light walked beside him and said with a smile, It's all up to Haotian. Master Yensei wiped the snow on his Taoist robe and said, In fact, it's not bad to fill them all up. The Great Divine Priest of Light nodded and said, Placing the 2 jars side by side can be considered as neighbors. Master Yensei turned his head and glanced at him. Then he put his sleeves behind him and continued to go up the stairs. Under a cedar tree, the 2 old people rested for a while, waiting for Sang Sang to catch up. Master Yensei looked at the calm face of the old man and suddenly asked curiously, Have you ever been to Tianqi? The Great Divine Priest of Light slightly squinted his old eyes and seemed to be thinking about things that happened many years ago. After a long silence, he said softly, I have been there. But then I was beaten down to the dust and deprived of the opportunity to be close to Haotian. Master Yensei looked at him and said with emotion, What a great lucky chance it is to break through the 5 states. How many cultivators in the world can't reach it in their whole lives? You actually reached this step more than 10 years ago. No wonder the Abbey Dean thought that you were the first person in Haotian Taoism. The Great Divine Priest of Light sighed softly and said, It's actually a kind of pain to have seen it, but it can't be seen again. Sang Sang finally arrived under the cedar tree. Her face was red and she was out of breath. The 2 old people did not give her any time to rest and continued to walk up the stairs to the top of the mountain. Master Yensei said, You have broken through the 5 states, but you were beaten down to the dust. This can only prove that Haotian thinks that what you have done is wrong, so he is determined to take back this gift. You have to pursue the shadow of the night, the son of Yama. In fact, does it have anything to do with the glory of Haotian? In fact, in the end you believe in yourself, not Haotian. The Great Divine Priest of Light sighed and said, In fact, in the past decades, I have been thinking about a question. Why do those excellent Divine Priests of Light in the history of the Divine Hall often leave the Peach Mountain? Why do those who are said to be closest to Haotian often choose a road that Haotian doesn't appreciate? The patriarch who founded the Devil's Doctrine 1,000 years ago, and the predecessor who betrayed the sect hundreds of years ago were like this. Finally, I also embarked on this road. He turned to look at Yensei and said after a long silence, I have thought about this for a long time. I was still thinking about every step when I was climbing the mountain. Until now, when I saw the red sun rising in the sea of clouds in front of me and saw the warm red light, I understood that it is because the person sitting on the Divine Priest of Light believes in the light. Master Yensei was silent. He understood the meaning of the Great Divine Priest of Light's words. He believed in the light, but Haotian didn't necessarily represent the light. At this time, the 2 old men had climbed to the top of the nameless mountain. Sang Sang rested under a straight white poplar tree behind her. The old and new urns beside her reflected the ruddy luster of her slightly dark face, full of warmth. At the end of the sea of clouds in the east of the cliff, the rising sun had all jumped out red and round. On the cliff there was still fine snow floating. Watching the sun in the snow, it was really a strange picture. Walking to the edge of the cliff, Master Yen Southeast reached out to drive away a drifting snowflake in front of him. Looking at the red sun calmly smiling between the two layers of clouds in the east, he asked, "How does it feel to take that step?" Taking a step forward, one would enter the lower layer of white clouds lingering between the mountains, or walk into the warm light. The great divine priest of light walked to his side and looked at the distant sun side by side. He said, "After the battle between you and Lu Bai beside the sea wall of the kingdom of Song, I saw the red sun gradually setting. I felt something, but I only took half a step forward. No matter it is half a step, you have taken it after all. I envy you very much." Master Yensei sighed and said, "No wonder Lu Bai looked at you so strangely that day. After all, I am still a guy who is slow to understand." The great divine priest of light recalled the shocking sword that broke the sky many years ago, as if it came from thousands of miles away. Thinking of the earth-shaking talisman of the old Taoist priest beside him at that time, he could not help but smile slightly and said, "In principle, Lu Bai should have taken half a step forward. But I don't know why there is no news for so many years. Maybe he is afraid?" Master Yensei thought of the strongest person he had met in his life. He slightly frowned but did not say anything. The great divine priest of light looked at him and said with a faint smile, "Many people think that you have broken the possibility of breaking the 5 states because you entered the Tao with pure yang. But I think there is always a new life in the end. Lu Bai is the strongest person in the world, but you can face him head-on and not be defeated. If he can cross it, there is no reason why you can't cross it. So what about you?" The mountain wind came with snow, blowing the loose Taoist robe. Master Yensei looked at the blue sky and the red sun between the clouds and said calmly, "Last year, when I became Ninkei's disciple, all my obsessions turned into peace and my mind suddenly became open. At that time I knew vaguely to take that step, but I don't know why I am not willing to take it." He looked at the great divine priest of light and said, "As you said about Lu Bai, because of fear." The great divine priest of light frowned in the morning light. After a moment of silence he asked, "Why are you afraid? When talisman Taoism goes to the end, it is the truth of heaven and earth, the most essential law. I have been cultivating talisman all my life, which is gradually going to the original. However, the extreme is the area that Haotian is qualified to touch." Master Yensei said expressionlessly, "When cultivating talisman Taoism, it is inevitable to touch the forbidden area. It is about self-revelation, not Tianqi. So what will happen when you break the 5 states? This is fear." The morning sun was calmly watching the cliff from the distant end of the sea of clouds. The light was so red and warm, illuminating the stone snow trees and urns on the edge of the cliff. That was the benevolent and generous Haotian giving rules and life to the human world. The great divine priest of light said, "Although I seem to have betrayed Haotian, I am cultivating divine skills after all. The glory of Haotian will give me eyes to see through everything in the world and endless power. I have the advantage in the daytime." Master Yensei shook his head and said, "Chang'an is my home. I have walked all the streets in the city and traveled all the great rivers and mountains outside the city. This mountain is my talisman, so you don't have much advantage." The great divine priest of light smiled and said, "In any case, it is better not to disturb the people's dreams." Master Yensei said, "Since I advise you to leave Chang, and this is the reason." As soon as he finished speaking, his wide sleeves waved gently. With a flash of clear light, the oil stains and the unpleasant smell in the sleeves were suddenly purified. A strong and inexplicable talisman intent slowly seeped out from the cracks in the mountain rocks. "I haven't seen the mountain Fu for many years," the great divine priest of light said with emotion. He stretched out his right hand and gently waved it in the wind and snow. The morning light from the east instantly turned his skinny right hand into a pure white jade. Countless weak specks of light scattered from his fingers and flew into the air like fireflies. When the strong talisman intent seeping out from the mountain rocks touched these holy light spots, there was no terrible result. Instead, they nestled together intimately and slowly drifted down from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the cliff, gradually forming an invisible barrier. The seven-colored flowing light flowed on the barrier, like a beautiful rainbow in the snow. The two old men looked at the rainbow cover in front of them that covered the whole mountain, feeling the harmony and strength in it. They were very satisfied and nodded, and then looked at the silent little girl behind them at the same time. The next chapter is about 5 o'clock. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 297. In an abandoned pavilion a few miles away, second senior brother looked indifferently in the direction of the mountain. Just a moment ago, the mountain suddenly disappeared. Whether it was seen with the naked eye or perceived, it no longer existed. Standing behind second senior brother, Chun Pippi scratched his head anxiously as his heart itched. Great Divine Priest of Light and Master Yen Sei were two super powerhouses at the peak of the knowing destiny state, and even half a step beyond the 5 states. It was not easy to see. In the past decades, except for the storms that youngest uncle once cut with his sword, there were only a few. How could he not be curious? There was nothing but wind and snow over there, but second brother still looked at that place with an indifferent expression, as if he could see everything clearly. His eyes did not emit crystal light, but were filled with a very serious and righteous aura. Wherever his eyes passed, all the wind, snow, and leaves avoided him in fear. Chun Pippi knew that second brother could see the movement on the mountain, so he nervously rubbed his hands and asked, "Senior brother, what's the situation now? Did they fight? Sang should be fine, right? Otherwise, I can't explain to youngest brother." Second brother slightly frowned and impatiently said, "Shut up and watch." Chun Pippi immediately shut up and thought bitterly, "How can I watch it if I can't see it?" Master Yen Sei took out something from his arms and solemnly handed it to Sang, and then said a few words. Great Divine Priest of Light looked at Sang tenderly, gently put an ID token in her hand, and then touched her head. At this time what was said were all last words, and what was told were all things after. But no one knew who said the last words and who would really leave a lot of things for Sang to deal with. Master Yen Sei walked to the edge of the cliff and closed his eyes to meditate. Great Divine Priest of Light walked to the other side of the cliff and calmly looked at the morning sun in the snow. Master Yen Sei opened his eyes. Great Divine Priest of Light withdrew his eyes. Master Yen Sei looked at the calm face of his old friend and suddenly laughed. He stretched out his right hand and gently waved his sleeve. Intentionally or unintentionally, a big talisman was formed. The talisman was so powerful that it could not be described. Being called by the talisman, thousands of rocks floated from the ground and densely covered the air, like countless huge solidified raindrops. His slender fingers, which seemed to have the plump and tender feeling of a girl from the House of Red Sleeves, slightly trembled, and the mountain talisman moved. The mountain rocks that seemed to have solidified all over the mountain whistled down, and it was like a vast rainstorm on a summer night that struck the mountain with a bang. Instantly, it caused countless holes to appear on the hard mountain cliffs, and gravel that covered the sky and blotted out the sun sprayed out. Great Divine Priest of Light calmly stood in the rain of rocks, raising his right hand over his head. His cotton-padded jacket, which seemed to be still with the smell of hot and sour noodle soup and chicken soup. A wisp of divine radiance burned on the tip of the index finger that was pure white like jade. The divine radiance didn't emit any power, yet it was pure and holy. No matter how it swayed in the rain of rocks that covered the sky, it didn't extinguish in the end. As long as the divine light in the sky was not extinguished, the stone rain falling from the sky could not touch the old cotton-padded jacket worn by the old man. The terrifying rain of rocks was still falling, and the splashing gravel was once again absorbed into the rain of rocks. It seemed as if it would never stop, and the snowflakes that were drifting down had already fled to some unknown place in fear. The stone rain in front of him suddenly slanted, unable to avoid it. The Haotian's divine flame around the tip of his index finger suddenly brightened up, illuminating the cliff that was suppressed by the rain of stones and snow. The flowers, grass, and trees all showed their true appearance. The morning sun had already moved behind the clouds. The index finger pointed at the sky on the cliff gave birth to a rising sun. Light was merciful and cold, gentle and powerful. It illuminated the world, it was everywhere. Those who follow it shall walk in the light, and those who forsake it shall walk in the darkness, and shall be destroyed. The rocks between the cliffs, the grass between the rocks, the rustling flowers, the trees and the people under the trees, were all looked down upon by the light, and were afraid. The rain of stones stopped raining down. Snowflakes fell from the sky again and landed on the invisible rainbow barrier outside the mountain, turning into 7 colors. Master Yensei slowly opened his eyes and felt the purest light in the world. He looked at the snowflakes in the colorful dawn outside the cliff expressionlessly and gently flicked his sleeves. The Taoist sleeves swept horizontally in front of him, like a straight line, whistling through the wind and sweeping away all obstacles. As the Taoist sleeves waved horizontally, the faint horizontal stone crack on the cliff suddenly became clear. The 2 muddy paths between the trees suddenly hardened. The mud that had been softened by the melting snow instantly became something harder than rocks. The mud seemed to have become a miniature river and mountain. The Taoist sleeves waved horizontally, and the stone crack on the cliff also moved horizontally. The 2 muddy mountain roads that turned into a great river and mountain were 2 vertical lines. 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines. 2 horizontal lines and 2 vertical lines. It was a well. This talisman made of the cliff clothes stretched between heaven and earth, and it had begun to spread around the bright lines to show its contempt, disdain and pride, because it was the most powerful Jing Fu. The well was the system of sealing fields. It had the meaning of ancient rites and the beginning of wonderful theories. But the simplest and most powerful Jing character intent was a simple line cutting, the kind of balanced and perfect cutting of space, the cutting of heaven and earth. The Jing Fu fell on the cliff, and the cutting lines, no matter big or small, all went deep and subtle. The rocks rolling between the cliff were all broken into powder. The grass and trees shrinking between the cliff were all broken into powder. The snowflakes fluttering over the cliff were all broken into powder. The cold wind passing through the cliff was all broken into powder. Finally, the cliff was broken. The omnipresent light also became dim and fragmented because of the fragmentation of space. This was the ultimate state of talisman Taoism pursued by Master Yensei. The well talisman on the cliff was the one that had the true unwavering will. Not only could it cut through everything in the world, but it could even cut through space. It was thousands of times stronger than the well talisman that Wang Jinglu had encountered on the rainy night of the Spring Breeze Pavilion. The light always needed space to walk. When the space was broken, how could it shine? The great divine priest of light looked at the countless thin lines in front of him and sighed in his heart. He knew that at this moment, Yensei finally stopped thinking about other problems and took the first step beyond the 5 states. The talisman Taoism that had the ability to make Haoyin's divine light dim, and even break had gone beyond the scope of Haoyin's permission. His cotton sleeves had been cut into pieces, and the cotton had also been cut into pieces by the talisman. There was a glittering light outside the skin of his arm, which had become thinner and thinner under the powerful Jing Fu. But his bare arm pointed to the sky in the east, and his index finger was burning with bright divine light, which was very firm and persistent. Perhaps it was his firm and persistent belief in the light that moved the creator of the heavens above. The great divine priest of light seemed to understand something. He looked at the clouds quietly, and his deep eyes were crystal clear. His old cheeks were full of tears, and he murmured, "Thank Haoyin for giving me strength." The sun outside the clouds suddenly shone brightly. A majestic force passed through the snow and clouds, ignoring the distance and the broken space between the cliff, and directly poured into his old body. There is another chapter today. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 298. That vast, irresistible, and perhaps even glorious tremendous power descended from the heavens and entered the human body. Without any experience or preparation, the relatively small and fragile human body would have been directly shattered into countless shards of light by that power, or turned into an idiot in bewilderment. But this situation was not strange to the great divine priest of light. Many years ago, he had taken that step and understood the revelation of Haotian. He understood that as long as he opened his heart and body in all aspects, he could get the most precious gift that Haotian gave to human beings, so that he could use this power that should not appear in the human world. The great divine priest of light's crystal deep eyes calmly watched everything between the cliffs, as if he could see every line of Jing Fu cutting the space. The divine light around his index finger had become a mass of solid white light. The beautiful and holy milky white light exuded an unimaginably horrible aura. Countless rays of pure white light spread out from his fingers. Some hung down like umbrellas protecting his body, but even more pierced out like sunlight, piercing into the space that had been cut into countless pieces. After the light pierced into the space fragments, the fragments suddenly became bright. The horrible aura contained in the light supported the lines on the edge, so that the space would not continue to be broken. Master Yen Sei used the powerful talisman meaning beyond the 5 states to cut the space into pieces. The great divine priest of light forcibly maintained the existence of the space with the power of Tianqi. Tens of thousands of pieces of bright broken space were like tens of thousands of tiny mirrors. The images of the cliffs, the air, the snow, the flowers and the trees appeared in the mirrors. Although they were all broken pictures that had no connection after being cut, they still existed. On the edge of tens of thousands of bright mirrors, the lines of cutting were slightly trembling. If these lines collapsed, the power of light would break through the shackles of cutting and return to the real and complete world. If these lines continued to cut into the fine parts, then the space would continue to be broken. No matter what kind of aura of light it was filled with, it could only gradually dim in the end. The talisman meaning borrowed from the aura of heaven and earth, or the power of light borrowed from Haotian. Which was more powerful? Talisman Taoism was the truth that human beings understood from heaven and earth, and mastered the deepest law of the world. Light was the reward or punishment that Haotian gave to the world. Who would win? Everything on the cliff, including the cliff itself, had been cut apart. Supported by Haotian's indifferent aura of light, it did not turn into green smoke. Only a tree was not shattered and sealed in the bright mirror. It was a tall white poplar tree, and a little girl was squatting under it. The little girl held an old urn in her left hand and a new one in her right. She trembled slightly in the light and talisman between the cliffs, like a grass shivering in the cold wind. A piece of snow that escaped from nowhere landed on her shoulder. She picked up the piece of snow and felt it slowly melt between her fingers. Looking at the scene, her willowy eyes grew brighter and brighter, but her pupils grew darker. Her black pupils seemed to be able to see the essence of light. The battle between a divine talisman master beyond the 5 states and a great light in the Tianqi state had no specific form or picture in the real world. However, both the old man and Master Yen Sei used their consciousness to seal the white poplar and the little girl under it out of the space, so she was a real bystander. Therefore, this battle that could not be understood by the secular world was portrayed into a picture that could be understood by human beings after falling into Song Song's black eyes. Those pictures were extremely beautiful and also extremely frightening. The majestic aura, the sacred light, the fearless heaven and earth, and the talisman meaning, they cut and hurt each other, snuggled and struggled. The space compressed the light, and the light broke through the space, and finally compressed and condensed into the stars in the dark night sky, into the silent flowing fire in the wilderness, and into the spring reflected on the dewdrops. Then all the pictures disappeared in Song Song's eyes. They were invisible and formless and even did not exist. There was absolute darkness and silence, darker than the darkest night, darker than the darkest clouds, just like the pupils of Yama. If it were any other ordinary girl, she would have fainted from the shock, but Sang Sang didn't. She didn't know what had happened. She couldn't understand what had happened on the cliff, but she still tried her best to open her eyes wide. She watched and waited quietly. She wanted to see everything that she could see and remember everything that she could remember, because she knew that Ning Ke would want to know what had happened today in the future. In the absolute darkness, a tiny light spot suddenly appeared, and then the light spot suddenly erupted into countless beams of light particles, breaking through the whole space in an instant, like the birth of a new world. It was also like countless beautiful fireworks blooming in the night sky. Looking at those beautiful fireworks, Sang Sang rubbed her eyes confusedly. When she opened her eyes again, she found that everything that had happened had disappeared, and the cliffs came back to her. The rainbow inhibition that covered the nameless mountain disappeared without a trace. Snowflakes fell again. On the edge of the cliff stood two old men looking up at the sky. At this time they finally became real old men, and they coughed when the cold wind passed through the cliff's blue. Master Yensei raised his arm and wiped his nose with his sleeve. He looked at the sky and murmured, "So that's what happened." The right sleeve of the great divine priest of light's cotton-padded jacket had become nothing. He put his right arm into the left sleeve, squatted down like an old farmer, and slightly squinted his eyes to look at somewhere in the sky. Master Yensei pointed to somewhere in the north, and said to the old man beside him, "I saw an unprecedented big talisman." The big talisman only had two simple strokes, starting from the north of the wilderness, one in the west and the other in the east. Then he looked back at Chang and city, which he had silently guarded for many years, and sighed with emotion, "We met here." At that moment, he surpassed the 5 states of cultivation and even went further. He clearly saw the world on the other side, the real future. Therefore, he knew that the unprecedented talisman was real. It was something that humans could really write. Therefore he was extremely happy and moved. The great divine priest of light squatted on the edge of the cliff and looked to the north along with his hand. He saw something different. He, who had really entered the Tianqi state, understood a lot of things that he could not understand before. The old man looked back at Sang Sang under the poplar tree, and his old face showed a hesitant and struggling expression. Finally he was relieved and understood. He smiled and said, "It turns out that this is my lucky chance." Master Yensei looked down at him and laughed. He said, "You still can't see it at this time? No matter what kind of lucky chance it is not our business but their business." The old man stood up, sighed and said with a smile, "Yes, it will be their world in the future." Many days ago, an old man was taken in by a little handmaiden in the old brush pen shop. At that time, the old man asked the little handmaiden a question. "Do you believe in lucky chance?" "I believe in lucky chance. I believe that everyone is destined to meet some people and do some things. These things arranged by Haotian are lucky chances. Many years ago, I saw the shadow of nightfall fall in this city. Once I saw it, I met it. Since I met it, I could no longer be separated. But I didn't see it clearly. What I met was not specific. I only knew that it existed, but I didn't know where it was. Then I saw a man in Chang, and who was born with knowledge. I felt that it was wrong because there should not be a man in the world who was born with knowledge. So my lucky chance with him began. Many days later, standing on the edge of the cliff on the outskirts of Chang'an, the old man realized that his lucky chance was not with that man, but with the little handmaiden named Sang Sang. A gust of winter wind blew, and the two old men standing side by side on the edge of the cliff instantly turned into ashes like snow. For hundreds of years, the most outstanding great divine priest of light in the West Hill Divine Palace left this world peacefully. He was so talented and omnipotent that he could be called the most powerful man in the Peach Mountain. But he was imprisoned for 14 years because of the so-called lucky chance. He escaped from the Peach Mountain and came to Chang'an, but he couldn't find the shadow of nightfall. It seemed that this trip was just to meet Sang Sang and accept her as his successor. At the moment before his death, he received a revelation from Haotian. Finally, for the first time, he clearly saw what the shadow of nightfall looked like. He saw that his successor would inherit him and shine in the world. So he left with peace of mind. For hundreds of years, the most outstanding divine talisman master of Haotian Taoism also left this world peacefully. He laughed and scolded and played in the world without any false reputation. But he was the first powerful man who surpassed the 5 states by virtue of talisman Taoism. Master Yensei lived a carefree and casual life. He was just looking for a successor. When he met the chicken soup calligraphy, he finally got his long-cherished wish. It seemed that he lingered in the brothel all his life just to accept that guy as his successor. At the moment before his death, he saw through the reincarnation of light and darkness and saw the big talisman. He knew that his successor Ning Ke would definitely write a big talisman that he had never written in his life. He knew that the guy would definitely be able to accomplish what countless talisman masters wanted to accomplish. So he left with peace of mind and even happiness. The wind blew and the snow stopped. It was quiet on the cliff. The lonely white poplar looked at the sky. The lonely Sang Sang wiped her eyes and struggled to walk to the edge of the cliff with 2 heavy urns in her arms. Then she knelt in front of the 2 piles of ashes. The wind on the cliff kept blowing, and the 2 piles of ashes were blown everywhere. Many of them had already been blown into the air, onto the snowy ground, and even further away. Sang Sang knelt on the ground and held out her hands to put the ashes into the urns. My teacher lives in the new urn. He likes cleanliness. Young master's teacher lives in the old urn. He is not afraid of oil. She reminded herself softly. She put the ashes of the 2 old people into the urns one by one. The annoying mountain wind disturbed her from time to time. The ashes were blown everywhere, even on her cotton skirt and small face. Sang Sang raised the back of her hand to wipe her face. Then she lowered her head and continued to put ashes into the urns. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 299. In the abandoned pavilion, second brother quietly looked at the disappearing mountain in the distance. There was no extra emotion on his face, only calmness and silence. His ancient hat was upright like a peak, and his hands were behind his back like clouds. Soon after, in the space where the disappearing mountain was, countless dark clouds suddenly gathered, and snowflakes danced wildly. Then, some transparent and invisible things vaguely appeared in the distance. The invisible barrier was overflowing with colorful lights, and it was extremely beautiful. Then, countless stars could be vaguely seen twinkling in it. After an unknown amount of time, the twinkling stars suddenly disappeared, and the space where the snow gathered turned pitch black. The order and rules there seemed to have become static, or it could be said that the time had come to an end. A bolt of lightning struck down from the sky. This bolt of lightning tore through the space for a very long distance, and was as thick as a river. However, there was no sound of thunder, nor any color, but it was extremely pure and milky white. The earth trembled slightly, and the dark space suddenly collapsed. The mountain peak that had disappeared inexplicably reappeared in the world. 2 majestic and powerful auras ran side by side. After the clouds outside the mountain peak were torn into pieces by these 2 auras, they slowly accelerated according to an unknown pattern, and gradually turned into a huge cloud vortex. Second brother silently looked at that place, and after a long time, he sincerely praised, "This is the real Tao." Standing behind second brother, Chan Pippi looked at the cloud vortex at the waist of the mountain, and felt that every inch of his skin was a little numb. He carefully sensed the 2 powerful breaths that were slowly disappearing, and murmured in shock, "They actually broke through the 5 states? This is really incredible. How did they do it? If they can take one step, they can take countless steps. At that moment, who knows how many steps they have taken above the 5 states?" Second brother slightly frowned, and then walked towards the mountain. Since the mountain had reappeared in the world, it could be climbed. The muddy mountain path seemed to have been altered by the great sculptor of time, making it hard and untouchable. The splashes of mud and the pits formed by the crushed mud were like stone sculptures lying quietly on the ground. Even the smallest details could be seen clearly. Thus, it gave off a completely different feeling from usual. Stepping on the mountain path was like stepping on the beautiful rivers and mountains and the history of mankind. Since the mountain was still there, the top and the cliff were naturally still there, but it seemed to be reorganized by some kind of power, and became a new existence. The cliff stones were broken into white powder, and it was as fine as the beach of the South Sea. Only a poplar tree was intact, and stood there alone. It should have grown in the cold peak of the cold plain, but now it appeared on the beach of the sea. So it was ridiculous. She was kneeling on the edge of the cliff, and was constantly putting the remaining ashes on the ground into 2 urns beside her. Her little hands were very carefully, and her slender fingers were gently digging the cracks on the ground. She gently scraped the edges of her palms, and then she held the urns carefully. She pursed her lips but did not cry. She opened her eyes widely, and repeated the action mechanically and numbly. Even her bright eyes were not filled with sadness. This was the first scene that second brother and Chun Pippi saw when they reached the top of the mountain. This scene would stay in their hearts for a long time, and make them support the protagonist of this painting in some aspects without any reason. Walking to the edge of the cliff, second brother looked at the floating clouds in front of him, and reached out his hand to feel the two auras that were about to completely disappear. He glanced at the little handmaiden whose skirt was hanging on the ground, and said, "Let them stay here. This is my teacher." Sang Sang shook her head and said, pointing to the new urns. She pointed to the old urns and said, "This is young master's teacher." Then she lowered her head and said, "Young master must want to know what my teacher looks like, and he must want to see his teacher again. So I have to bring them back to young master, and I can't let them be blown away by the wind." In the Taoist hall deep in the Southern Gate Temple, Li Qingshan, the nation master of Tang, stared at the reflection on the dark-colored paulownia floor in a daze. He did not notice how pale and haggard his face was, because at this time there was only that wretched and ridiculous face in his eyes. He knew that he would never see that face again. Although he sometimes felt helpless and even a little tired of that face in the past years, he still fell into great sorrow at this time. Was it because of his senior brother's slutty behavior, or because he was always like a child in front of him? Li Qingshan looked at the reflection on the floor and smiled bitterly. People only knew that he was the nation master of Haotian South School Temple, but few people knew about his senior brother. However, it was his senior brother who helped him block Lu Bai's sword. Now that the great divine priest of light came to Chang'an, it was still his senior brother who stood in front of him. "Master, drink the medicine." He Mingqi raised the medicine tray over his head. He knew that his master was very sad at this time, but as a disciple, he had to protect his master's health, especially at such a sad moment. "Put it down." Li Qingshan restrained his pain and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "I'll drink it later." He Mingqi put down the medicine tray and silently withdrew from the Taoist hall. Outside the doorway, he picked up the yellow paper umbrella and tucked it under his armpit. After a few steps, he was surrounded by the Taoist priests and nuns in the snowy garden. The death of Master Yen Sei might not cause a ripple among the people, because not many people knew his name. However, these Taoist priests of the Southern School were different. Their faces were full of sadness and anger. A Taoist nun asked in a trembling voice, "How could that person hide in Chang, and for so long?" It was still snowing outside the courtyard of the military ministry. The sky was gloomy as if Haotian was angry. The atmosphere in the room was depressed like the gloomy sky. The generals' faces were full of anger and shame. How could that person hide in Chang and for so long? The one who asked in a low voice was Defender General of the State Su Shi of the Tang Empire. After receiving the secret order from His Majesty, he returned to Chang, and at an unimaginable speed. However, when he entered the city gate at noon, he heard the shocking news. Among the military generals who had the qualifications to cooperate with Master Yen Sei, now he was the only one left in the whole world, the first person in the military of the empire. So this news made him angry and more painful. Defender General Su Shi's face was so gloomy that it seemed to drip water. He looked at the crowd and said in a cold voice, "Just this morning, one of the pillars of the Tang Empire fell. I don't care who the enemy is. I only know that His Majesty gave you dozens of days, but you failed to find and kill him." The generals in the room lowered their heads. Some wanted to refute that it should be the negligence of the Imperial Center Administration. However, facing the angry face of Defender General of the State Su Shi, and the strong sense of honor deep in their hearts as soldiers of the Tang Empire, they didn't say anything. Don't try to shirk the responsibility, unless you forget your identity. You are soldiers. The land under your feet is the capital of the Tang Empire, Chang'an. Therefore, you have the obligation to ensure the safety here. Instead of letting a person old enough to be your grandfather take the risk to fight. He looked at Defender General of Huaihua and said sternly, "Why didn't you take the initiative to attack at that time?" Defender General of Huaihua stood up, lowered his head and said shamefully, His Majesty strictly ordered to ensure the safety of the residents of Chang'an. If we used the armored black cavalry, it would be too shocking. Moreover, the opponent was too strong. Su Shi slightly narrowed his eyes and suddenly shouted angrily, "Is the great divine priest of West Hill so great? You are scared out of your wits, so you can only hide like mice and watch coldly like onlookers. When have the Tang Empire's soldiers been so timid?" Have there been less cultivators in the knowing destiny state who fell under the soldiers' arrows on the battlefield? After saying this, he coughed violently and painfully until he couldn't stand up. Defender General's gray hair fluttered in the wind, and the wrinkles around his eyebrows were very deep. The generals in the hall knew that this was the beginning of the general's lung disease. They couldn't help but feel ashamed and anxious. They hurriedly called for the medical officer to come in and treat him. Su Shi struggled to straighten up and looked at the generals with a stern expression. He said, "I don't blame you for what happened this morning. After all, it was the Southgate Temple and the Academy who attacked first. But I really want to know how Wei Guangming could hide in Chang, and for so many days, and why no one in the Tang Empire could find him. What on earth happened? Investigate carefully. If the military is lazy or timid, kill them all. If it's the Imperial Center Administration or the Southgate Temple, report to me. I will ask for the Imperial decree to kill them and bury them with Master Yen Sei." The general's painful coughs and angry shouts intertwined for a long time. There were 4 magnificent Taoist temples on the top of Peach Mountain closest to the sky. When there was no worship ceremony, no one was allowed to come close. Even the divine priests were rarely seen. It seemed empty, quiet, and indifferent. In the dark temple near the edge of the cliff, there was a painful cough. The confinement of the great divine priest of judgment was broken by the great divine priest of light, and was injured until now. At this time, when he heard the news of that person's death, he was so emotional that he coughed. There was no sound in the divine hall of revelation, only silence. The White Temple, which was relatively the simplest, was completely silent. Because the great divine priest of light who was supposed to be in the temple had not sat on the throne for nearly 15 years, and he would never come back again. A sigh was heard from the pristine white divine hall at the highest point. It was a soft sigh, but it resounded throughout the Peach Mountain like thunder. Then it became silent all of a sudden. After an unknown period of time, the majestic voice rang out again. "How can the successor of light wander in the mortal world? He should be taken back to Taoism." On a nameless island in the far south, a Taoist in indigo stood on a high reef, silently looking at the boiling sea in front of him. He had been watching the sea here for many days, but he did not know what mysteries he had seen. One day he felt something and turned to look at the mainland. He frowned slightly and said softly, "What on earth did you see? How much of your light will the successor you have found be able to inherit? How much lucky chance does he have? Is this wine? Does it deserve to be called wine?" In a small remote county of Gushan Commandery, an extremely angry voice sounded in an inconspicuous wine shop near the street. The one who shouted hoarsely and accused the Bat Tavern was a tall old man whose face was completely red. He wore a purple lambskin robe and a black overcoat. The material seemed to be extremely expensive, but it was unknown whether it was because it had been weathered for a long time or because of other reasons, but the old man always felt a little old when he wore it. The wine shop owner was a very strong middle-aged man. He stared at the old man in front of him and spat on the ground fiercely. He said disdainfully, "This is the most famous Zhejiang double distilled wine in Gushan Commandery. What? You have a problem with that?" The old man angrily lifted the wine bag in his hand and spat everywhere. He said, "Do you think I have never drunk good wine? How can Zhejiang double distilled wine be as bland as your wine?" The wine shop owner stared at him and pushed him away. He scolded, "I'm giving you face because you are a little old. Don't take it. My double distilled wine is so bland. What can you do?" The old man trembled with anger. He rolled up his sleeves and was ready to step forward. He shouted, "I can tolerate the taste of chicken soup stewed into white vinegar. But how can I neglect the wine? If I can tolerate it, I can't." After a moment, The old man was beaten out of the wine shop. His originally meticulously combed hair was now a mess, and the black cloak on his body was torn into several large holes. He looked extremely miserable. The old man stood on the street and shouted at the wine shop, "Country bumpkin, I have to wait for the old man to come out before I dare to come out. You filthy things don't even know the principle of respecting the old and respecting the wise. How could a shop that sold fake wine understand such a profound principle?" Immediately, a few shop assistants carrying sticks rushed out. The old man screamed and ran away with his head in his hands. He ran faster than the young people. Even though he ran in a hurry, he still held the wine bag tightly in his hand. It seemed that even the worst wine was better than nothing. He ran out of the county and came to a dilapidated Taoist temple. An old yellow bull was eating grass in boredom. Probably because grass was not as delicious as fish or mutton, it was extremely tired and kicked its front hooves angrily from time to time. Seeing the old man run back to the Taoist temple in embarrassment, the old yellow bull raised its head and mooed, as if laughing at him. The old man opened the wine bag and drank 2 mouthfuls. When his breathing gradually stopped, he could not help but shake his head and sigh that people's hearts were not what they used to be. Then he walked to the stone steps of the temple and picked up a piece of firewood to dig into the ashes of the dying fire. Two pieces of potatoes were dug out from the ashes and rolled on the ground. The old yellow bull walked over and looked at the old man attentively and affectionately. The old man was furious. He pointed at the 2 burnt potatoes with the firewood and shouted, "I told you to watch the fire. I told you to watch the fire. Can you still eat them after they've been burnt to ashes? Can you still call them potatoes?" In the far north, in the Tianqi Mountains deep in the wilderness, in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, which had been forgotten for many years, Ningke woke up, but he could not remember what had happened. He looked around the dark room blankly and found that the hill made of white skeletons had collapsed into rubble. There were only 2 iron chains left where the old monk was, and the front end of the chains was a pile of ashes. Then he remembered everything and his body suddenly relaxed. However, looking at the pile of ashes, he did not know why there was an inexplicable sadness in his heart. "Thank you. I will continue to work hard to write the story. Please continue to support me. Thank you." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Li Mei Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.